Bore da a croeso. Good morning and welcome to our coverage of a very special day for Wales. As Charles III, the man who was Prince of Wales for more than 60 years, returns for the first time as king. We have to go back to 1958 when Queen Elizabeth announced that her eldest son, when he was just 9 years old, would become Prince of Wales. And so, as she became the longest-serving British monarch in history, he in turn held the title for the longest-serving Prince of Wales, Tywysog Cymru. Wales is, in his own words, the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty. We've seen him visit Scotland and Northern Ireland, of course, since the death of the Queen, and today marks the final visit for King Charles on his tour of the nations of the United Kingdom. It will be a truly momentous occasion when he arrives in Cardiff and takes his first steps on Welsh soil. So let me just tell you what's going to happen today. King Charles will arrive at around 11:10 by helicopter with the Queen Consort. They'll be escorted directly to Llandaff Cathedral for a service of prayer and reflection for the Queen. After the service, the royal party will proceed to Cardiff Bay, where at the Senedd, or the Welsh Parliament, the First Minister will propose a motion of condolence on behalf of the people of Wales. Their visit to the Welsh capital finishes at Cardiff Castle, where we're expecting the biggest crowds and where there'll be a private audience with the First Minister and the Llywyd, that is the presiding officer of the Senedd, followed by a reception with representatives from royal patronages and faith communities. Now, the King's journey will take him to some of the oldest locations in the city, as well as one of the newest, the seat of power for the devolved nation at the Senedd. At Llandaff, crowds have gathered already on the green, not only to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen, but also, of course, to get their first glimpse of King Charles. And in Llandaff Cathedral, invited guests are taking their seats for a service of prayer and reflection. To witness the occasion is Gethin Jones.
Diolch, Nick. Bore da from Llandaff Cathedral, looking its very best thanks to the morning sunshine and the beautiful blue skies that are surrounding it this morning. It's an area I'm very familiar with. I got to stay with Mum and Dad last night and made my way here through Llandaff village on foot. Probably the best way to get here due to the crowds that have been gathering in anticipation of getting their first glimpse of the King and, of course, to pay their respects to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Very shortly, the King will be making his way to the service. And of course, Llandaff Cathedral has been the setting for many a royal visit throughout history. Back in 1912, His Majesty King George V and Queen Mary were here. More recently, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were here in celebration of the Silver and Diamond Jubilee. But as you can imagine, a very different feeling here this morning, more sombre, an atmosphere of quiet reflection as people look forward to that service of remembrance and prayer in about half an hour's time. King Charles, or Prince of Wales as he was then, was here in 2018 as part of the anniversary of the NHS at 70. The following year then, in 2019, celebrating his 50 years as Prince of Wales with a tour of Wales, which began right here at Llandaff Cathedral. He'll be making his way into the cathedral, and there will be invited guests representing religion, service, culture and politics from all over Wales, all here to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen. And guiding us through the proceedings will be Gareth Lewis.
Thanks, Gethin. This is a cathedral that stops you in your tracks as soon as you step inside. That is the magnificent Majestus, Christ in Majesty, by the sculptor Jacob Epstein. Perhaps not quite what you'd expect to find in a place of worship that dates from the 6th century. The sculpture itself is 16 feet high, weighs 355 kilograms. That's 55.5 stone in old money. It was installed in 1957, a symbol of the cathedral rising from the ashes of war after it was bombed by the Luftwaffe. And this place has a history of rising from the ashes. The organ dates from just 2010. The old one was damaged beyond repair back in 2007 when the cathedral was struck by lightning. It's big, nearly 5,000 pipes, and there's a big strong royal link too. His Majesty the King was patron of the £1.5 million fundraising campaign to get that new instrument in place. And in every corner of this cathedral there is something to catch the eye. Just on the left, as the royal couple enter through the west door, is the Rossetti triptych. It's created by Dante Gabriele Rossetti. It took him 6 years to paint between 1858 and 1864. It is by far the cathedral's most valuable work of art. That is the middle panel, Mary with baby Jesus, and on the left and on the right you have David off to take Goliath, and then a more mature David as king, dressed for battle but surrounded by symbols of immortality. And the cathedral's location, also worth a mention. This is no city centre cathedral. We've alluded to this already, but it lies in Cardiff's western suburbs, and Llandaff, a city within a city, the church by the River Taff, is where we are today. Modern Cardiff only became a city in 1905. The current building, though, has stood on this site since Norman times in 1120. And you've just have noticed too, Cardiff, a very, very green city indeed.
Llandaff. Gareth Lewis there for us at the beautiful Llandaff Cathedral. I should say that if you'd like to follow today's events without commentary, then that option is available on the red button. So as we wait for the new king to arrive, let's take a moment to pause and reflect and look back at Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's long relationship with the people and places in Wales.
She always showed a concern for every single person who lives in the UK. And, you know, being Welsh is an important part of that.
She was always one to make the people she met feel at ease.
You knew in the future these moments would become very, very important.
Queen Elizabeth's long relationship with Wales had its roots in her early childhood. A miniature Welsh cottage, a Bwthin-Bach, was gifted to the 6-year-old princess on behalf of the children of Wales. It's since been loved by generations of royals.
Look in there first.
Often under the original owner's watchful eye. This early bond with Wales grew steadily. In 1946, a 20-year-old Princess Elizabeth came to the National Eisteddfod in Mountain Ash to be honoured with her own bardic name.
Elizabeth of Windsor.
But her first official tour of Wales as Queen came later, 2 years after her coronation. It was a huge event and the first chance for the Welsh people to show their affection for the young monarch. She, in turn, found plenty which chimed with her own passions, not least her love of horses.
The Queen and the Duke made their way first to see the Welsh mountain ponies being judged, and one of them, called Owain Glyndŵr, was to show an unsuitable appetite for the royal carnations.
In subsequent years, she visited Wales frequently through times of celebration and of grief. In 1966, tragedy struck. In Aberfan, a coal slag heap collapsed onto a village school, killing 116 children. The Queen, herself the mother of young children, visited the village and was visibly shocked.
I think it was a very difficult thing that she did. Having children herself, course, being a mother herself, she could empathise with people there. It was a wonderful thing to come to the village. People needed something at that time because it was such a terrible thing that had happened.
The Queen vowed to return to Aberfan, a promise she fulfilled on several occasions to share in the community's rebuilding and remembrance. The lives of those who serve in the Welsh regiments and their families were always close to the Queen's heart. In 1995, Simon Manwaring was one of a group of Welsh Fusiliers taken hostage in Bosnia. His wife Sandra had recently given birth.
It was just total dread and fear. Got a tiny baby, and I just thought he would never know who his dad was.
On a visit to the regiment's barracks near Haverfordwest, the Queen requested a private meeting with Sandra and the wives of other hostages.
She was a genuine mum, and she could understand that I was a mum and how I must be feeling. In fact, she did say as she was leaving, and she looked back and she said, "We will try our best to help your men."
Thankfully, the hostages were released a few days later. The Queen asked to meet them.
She wanted to see them and see how they were. And I remember her saying to me, "Oh my, hasn't the baby grown?"
Throughout her long reign, Her Majesty was a regular visitor to Wales, supporting her charities and leading national events like the spectacular gala opening of the Wales Millennium Centre. Her last visit, at the age of 95, was to open the latest session of the Welsh Parliament.
It is a pleasure to be with you today, and I congratulate you on your recent election.
Over the years, it's clear that Her Majesty's commitment to Wales and her interest in its people never waned.
There's something incredibly brilliant about meeting Her Majesty, and the days I met her, these are the ones that shine.
In all the times I met her, she was kind of warm and welcoming. Every single time, she made you feel that you were really important.
She always carried out her duties as long as she was able to do it. And that, I think, is a lesson to us all.
Now, it's well known that Her Majesty the Queen has a deep underlying faith. In fact, she swore an oath to be the defender of the faith, something she took very seriously. And joining me is Dr. Barry Morgan, the former Archbishop of Wales. Good morning. Great to see you this morning.
Thank you.
Some fabulous footage there, wasn't it, of the Queen's relationship with Wales. How do you assess that over a lifetime, really?
Well, it's quite obvious that she was very fond of Wales, came very often. Very touching that she went back to Aberfan several times, because that really touched a chord with her, I think. It wasn't just a one-off visit, but she came back again and again and again. And people in Aberfan will tell you that, in fact, she took an interest in what was going on there.
Yes, I was in Aberfan last week, actually, broadcasting in the Memorial Garden, the site of Pantglas Junior School. It's quite a unique relationship that she struck there over the years, you know, through tragedy with a particular community. Tremendous compassion.
Well, I suppose as a mother herself, she understood something about the pain of what those parents must have been going through, and therefore she really empathised and sympathised and came back again and again to that village. And of course other parts of Wales as well. I mean, she came to Llandaff Cathedral several times when I was there. She came to open the Parliament several times, and always seemed very glad to be in Wales.
Yes, you would be in that select group of clergymen who would have had to preach to the Queen, and you would have met her numerous times. But what was that like?
I'm not sure that you'd call it select, really. It's nerve-wracking, you know. I think I had to preach in front of her 3 or 4 times. And of course, there were preparations for when she would eventually die for this service today. And I didn't think, to be honest, I would still be in office when she died. So I'm glad I am not the one who has to preach today at the memorial service, but one of my successors. But she always puts you at ease about it. And I remember having to preach at Sandringham in front of her. The drill was that you go for the weekend. And it's unusual, I think, for the Archbishop of Wales to go, because normally it's just restricted to diocesan bishops of the Church of England. Anyway, she obviously forgot that the Church in Wales was established and I was invited. And so you had to preach. And I remember I gave the blessing. And I gave the blessing in Welsh, not realising that, in fact, the choir sang the Amen. But they came in just, you know, beautifully. And the Queen was highly amused at this and said to me, "You must have told them that you were going to give the blessing in Welsh." And I said, "Well, actually, I didn't. I just gave the blessing spontaneously, as I do." And she said they were perfect. I said, "Yes, you know, I could take them back to the Diocese of Llandaff. There are some parish choirs that still haven't got it. You know, they don't come in on time when I give the blessing in Welsh." So it really was very good.
And we heard from Gareth there, running us through the cathedral, your old stomping ground, of course.
Yes.
How important is it to have this service to reflect and remember the Queen for Wales and indeed for the cathedral?
Well, very important, because of course she's been to Edinburgh, she's been to Belfast, and now, and also the King. I mean, the King has been to Belfast, he's been to Edinburgh, and now he's coming to Wales, and it's a service of reflection and prayer in Llandaff Cathedral. It's different from the other places because it's not only is it an ecumenical service, but it's an interfaith service in the sense that the Secretary General of the Muslim Council for Wales is offering a prayer, as indeed is somebody from the Jewish faith, and the chair of the Interfaith Council for Wales. It's also totally bilingual. The hymns are, there's one hymn in Welsh, there's one in English, and the third hymn is, there's a verse in Welsh. They're well-known hymns. One is by Rhys Nicholas, Pandafedwen, which talks about the importance of Jesus Christ, and the Queen herself, of course, had talked about the importance of the Christian faith for her personally and how she prayed. And she saw herself as well as having a vocation. You know, we tend to think that only clergy have vocations, but she saw herself as having a vocation to this role that she had been anointed to, and took it very seriously. And I remember telling me once that she saw it as a lifelong thing, unless, of course, she became totally incapacitated by dementia or motor neuron disease. She would carry on to the end, as indeed she did.
Interesting stuff. OK, we'll get some more thoughts from you in a bit. Barry Morgan, thanks very much indeed for now. Well, let's go back to Cardiff and to Llandaff Cathedral, where most of the congregation are now in their seats. Amongst the guests expected today is Liz Truss, who just last week was appointed Prime Minister by the Queen, of course. His Majesty the King and his Queen Consort Camilla are currently making their way to Wales in a helicopter and are due to land in around 20 minutes' time. My colleague Gareth Lewis is inside the cathedral and has the details of what we can expect from the service.
Well, Nick, some of those guests were arriving very early. They've been here for the best part of 2 hours already. But as you said, it's really filling up now. That's Adam Price, nearest the camera, the leader of Plaid Cymru. Jane Dodds, leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats. Next to him then Andrew R.T. Davies, who's the leader of the Welsh Tories in the Senedd. There's party unity there, that's the Llywydd. Ellen Jones, who's a Plaid Cymru Senedd member, to Andrew R.T. Davies's right. So as Gethin was saying, you've got politicians, you've got members of the armed services, the emergency services, farming unions, business, and right at the back left there you can see the cadets and various younger people have been invited specially along for the occasion today. They reckon about 440 people in all the capacity here, and they, I can tell you now, have been all smiles since they got in here about an hour or so ago. I think the first thing you'll notice at home today when the service gets underway, particularly if you're watching outside of Wales, is that it will be bilingual, so in English and in Welsh. And a lot of the people speaking or officiating today are either fluent in both languages, and they've just spotted themselves, or have Welsh as their first language. And talking of language, that is a William Morgan Bible from 1588. William Morgan translated the first complete Bible, so Old Testament and New Testament, into Welsh from Greek and Hebrew. That one is on loan from the National Library in Aberystwyth, and it'll be carried down the aisle at the start of the ceremony by two youngsters from the Cathedral Sunday School, Alice and Toby. The print quality is absolutely outstanding for a book of that age. Now, also today, the harp is considered Wales's national instrument. We have two Welsh harpists playing today. That is the current royal harpist, Alice Hughes from Powys. Alongside her will be Catherine Finch, too, one of her predecessors. Now, Alice's harp, you can see the detail there, is decorated with Welsh motifs, the Prince of Wales feathers at the top. There are also leeks and daffodils entwined around in that gold leaf. And look, it's now a sound synonymous with royal occasions in Wales after the then Prince Charles reinstated the role in 2000, the first time in more than 120 years that there'd been a royal harpist. Now, in terms of who will address the congregation today, I will have a reading in Welsh from the first book of Kings from Wales's First Minister, Mark Drakeford. It's the granting of wisdom from God to King Solomon during a dream, a reading, I suppose, about what it makes to be a good leader. I will also hear from the Archbishop of Wales, the Most Reverend Andrew John, who will give the address and the blessing. Quite a day for him. He's been Archbishop not quite for a year yet. Prayers will be led by the Bishop of Llandaff, the Right Reverend June Osborne. And also, as we've said already, there'll be multi-faith prayers, prayers too from across the denominations. Now, at the end, both national anthems will be sung. Hyn Wlad Fy Nadaib, Land of My Fathers, the Welsh national anthem, and then God Save the King. And as the politicians there wait, at the end of the service, King Charles and the Queen Consort Camilla will sign the visitors' book, a book that has a very special and relatively recent royal history of its own. And there's the book in front of the triptychs, which we've seen already. The two youngsters, by the way, will be carrying the Bible a little later on. And that book, part of the history, part of the unique fabric of this cathedral, as we'll find out now as we look back at some of the historic royal visits to Llandaff Cathedral.
Llandaff Cathedral in Cardiff has been the focal point of many a royal visit to the Welsh capital. Queen Elizabeth II had a long-standing connection to the cathedral. Her first visit to Llandaff was to attend the official reopening in 1960. The building had been almost destroyed by a German bomb during the Cardiff Blitz in the Second World War. 20 years later, the cathedral was reborn with a new statue of Christ by sculptor Jacob Epstein at its heart. Arthur Impey was a steward on the day.
It was a very big occasion. All the stops were pulled out. All the high and mighty of the land were invited to it.
He looks now at the great Epstein statue that soars over the net.
The Queen arrived looking up at the Epstein statue. I wouldn't like to say what her reaction was to it. I was a very young steward, only just over 20, so I ended up, in fact, guarding a far distant door, and I was rather annoyed because I really didn't see anything of the actual service. But then the Queen left the cathedral and came to my door. So I had quite a close-up view in the end of the Queen.
Her Majesty visited Llandaff on 3 further occasions, the most spectacular during her Silver Jubilee. She returned again in 2012 to mark 60 years of her reign.
My role was to greet her and to welcome her, and then to preach, which was an unnerving kind of experience. She just remarked about how lovely the cathedral was and how glad she was to be back.
And the Queen is not the only royal to have made an impression at Llandaff over the years. In 1991, Prince William visited the cathedral with his parents to make his first public appearance.
To great interest of all the press, they discovered that Prince William is left-handed. Nobody had noticed this before, as far as the general public was concerned.
Days like these live long in the memory, and none more so than when Queen Elizabeth was present.
The Christian faith was important in her personal life, and she took her duty as Queen, therefore, very seriously.
To have Her Majesty marking an occasion with a royal visit, they are important events in the life of the nation.
She was held in great affection by people in Wales, and you could see that when on royal visits, people would turn out in their thousands just to greet her and to wave to her.
Wonderful watching some of those memories of Her Majesty visiting Llandaff, and 2 people who were watching with much enjoyment and interest were former Welsh Guardsman, broadcaster, author Simon Weston, and the brilliant director of music at the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama, Tim Rhys-Evans. Gents, nice to see you both. Before I ask you about your memories of meeting Her Majesty, maybe just a thought on how you're feeling right now outside the cathedral amongst the crowds waiting for the new king.
I suppose it's bittersweet from my perspective because Her Majesty has gone, obviously, and now we have the king, so it's a happy moment to have him here. But what's led up to it is the sad thing, but you know, it's an eventuality. But you know, I feel very honoured and very proud just to be here.
I think that's a feeling many people have got in the crowd, isn't it?
Oh, it's absolutely wonderful to hear the crowd, see so many people turning up, and Cardiff just looking beautiful in the cloudless skies this morning. You know, it's a great honour to be here.
Yeah, the weather has been kind for most part, hasn't it, throughout the last week. Simon, you would have met Her Majesty on numerous occasions, as well as members of the royal family. Your lasting memory of the Queen?
My lasting memory was when she presented me with my CB. She didn't say a great deal, but what she did say was just so powerful. It was just short little clips, but she just had a way of saying the right thing at the right time. And she always had a twinkle in her eye and a smile. And you could always get that feeling of she wanted to have a better bit of fun and get the humour out, I think.
It's interesting you mentioned the sense of humour, because it's the smile that we remember. Just last week, actually, when she met the incoming Prime Minister Liz Truss, who has just arrived here at Llandaff Cathedral this morning. Of course, the Queen working up until the very end, like she felt like she needed to do. And maybe, Tim, this is a moment in time right now, because you've got the King, who is here for the first time in his new role, the Prime Minister, who is visiting Wales in her new role for the first time. It's a real historic moment, isn't it?
It is. I think it's hugely significant, and you know, former Prince of Wales, now King, just being here. And just knowing that he has always been such an active Prince of Wales. It's for the country to welcome him as King. I think is it's a special day. But as Simon says, obviously brought about through terrific sadness.
Yeah. You know firsthand the work that King Charles has done. He works closely with you. He's president now of the college, isn't he? What significance does that have, that royal patronage?
It makes an enormous difference to us. I mean, he is, as we've seen in so many of his speeches, which have quoted Shakespeare, he is genuinely interested in culture and the arts, and he's a very active president who wants to attend performances, and also just really meaningfully, saying to us, what can I do for you?
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just a name on a website or on some headed notepaper. It's a very meaningful part, which opens up doors throughout the world to raising the profile of the college. And yeah, we're very. Of course, he's got a big new job.
Yes,
so
yeah.
whether he'll be able to continue, but he's been a fantastic president, and
it sounds like he's very hands-on, which will serve him well in his new role and actually following his mother's footsteps.
He's got big shoes to fill, but having met him over the years on different occasions, he's more than ably suited to that. He's been building up for this all his life. So he's got his mother's sense of humour and his mother's sincerity and his mother's work ethic. So I don't think there'll be any difficulty transitioning from where he's been into the role he'll take on.
Yeah.
So I just think that, we can't change what's happened, but, we have to look to the future. It's good to pay reverence to the past, but this is about the future now, and this is why he's here, to announce to Wales that he's the king. So,
the Wales and the world. I think you've said before, haven't you? You see his role as a global service, not just. And actually, the eyes of the world this morning on Llandaff Cathedral, but the whole world have been affected by this news.
Oh, absolutely. The royal family, whatever your opinion, most of the people who have any involvement with it are very fond of them and have a great deal of reverence and respect for them, because they're a unifying feature for most of us. And that should be respected and accepted. I think that King Charles, because of his love of culture and his love of history and his love of people and religions, whatever religion it is, he cares about so many things and so many people. He's a unifying factor, and I think people should just accept that and let this all happen naturally and become the wonderful spectacle it can become.
People of all walks of life in the cathedral this morning for the service, bringing everyone together. Just on that, from your musical knowledge, to have a service like this, unique, special, privilege?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I feel for all those performers, many who are in the choir this morning, and, there's a huge amount of pressure on them. The two royal harpists, Catherine Finch, who was the first royal harpist, and Alice Hughes, the current royal harpist, playing in a hugely significant occasion. They will all be feeling that, but celebrating Wales as a land of song and as a land of a very musical nation it's great to have this opportunity to showcase what is special and unique about our nation.
Yeah, some of those hymns in that cathedral will be very, very special this morning, and hopefully we'll try and catch up with Catherine Finch after the service as well, as we will chat more with you afterwards as well. But for now, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Diolch.
Gethin, thanks very much indeed. Well, with me is Dr Barry Morgan, former Archbishop of Wales, and also Emily Nash, the royal correspondent for Hello magazine. Hello,
Hi,
Emily. A magazine which I'm told the Queen was a fan of.
We know it is seen in the royal household. I'm not sure whether Her Majesty picked it up very regularly, but it is seen there.
And particular interest to you because you are from Cardiff, originally. Fabulous sights there of your home city. And obviously, with your day job, you have travelled with the royal family. We've learnt a lot about the relationship between the Queen and Scotland, obviously, earlier this week, and indeed Northern Ireland. How does Wales fit into that?
That's a very good question. I think it's fair to say that it is a slightly complicated relationship in some ways, but the now King has really committed himself over the years. He has bought a home there. He's the first Prince of Wales in history to do that. He was the longest serving Prince of Wales, and he has spent a lot of time there. I've covered lots of jobs with him in Wales on the ground, and when people come in contact with him, they always come away completely charmed. It's very interesting, I think, as Simon Weston was saying just now, when people actually encounter the now King, they are won over, whatever their thoughts might have been previously.
And Barry, I think we've got a sense of it there with the shots from Llandaff. There's a mix of emotions today, isn't there? There's obviously there will be the great solemnity now that we see in the service.
Yeah.
But there's huge excitement. I've seen it myself this week, building up in Cardiff, and you can hear it in the crowds.
Yes, that's right. And I think, you know, the new king last Friday evening, not long after his mother's death, hit all the right notes, really, and spoke about unifying the nations. He spoke about his role as defender of the faith of the Church of England. He spoke about the importance of constitutional monarchy. So all the things that perhaps some people were worried about, he managed to reassure people, and also reached out, of course, to Harry and Meghan, and that was very important, reconciliation. I remember him too, of course, because he was Chancellor of the University of Wales, and I, until recently, was the Pro-Chancellor, so I had to deputise for him quite regularly. So he takes a great interest in things Welsh. And my 16-year-old granddaughter, who's a very thoughtful and sensitive person, asked me only yesterday, had I written a letter of condolence to Prince Charles, and to King Charles, and I said, well, I haven't yet, but I am going to. And she said, don't forget, he wrote you a most lovely letter when Granny died. So I stand rebuked, really, and I will get on and write that letter.
Better get that letter written. And Emily, when you look at, I mean, for such a long time, he was Prince of Wales, and obviously we've had the commitments that he's done. To what extent will he be able to maintain that, do you think? Obviously now with the new role as king, it's going to be difficult in that sense.
It is going to be difficult, and I think that's exactly the reason why he's created William as the next Prince of Wales, and he, you know, has a strong family commitment to Wales as a nation. He has more than 40 patronages there. He's now king. He's not going to have the time he once had to interact with them, but I'm sure he's still going to be a regular visitor.
And in terms of the cathedral, Barry, we saw with the video, I mean, this is a cathedral used to big occasions.
Absolutely.
On a fairly regular basis, but this is right up there, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it's been a long time, as I said, in the planning. But it will all go off like clockwork because everything will have been thought about.
And while you're talking, just to say that we can see the helicopter of the King and the Queen Consort arriving. It's not quite arrived yet, it's just in the air above Cardiff, due to arrive at Pontcanna Fields. We'll just keep on talking while we're waiting for that, for the helicopter to arrive. It's just Pontcanna Fields, just a little sense of the geography, just down the road from Llandaff Cathedral.
That's right.
Relatively compact city, Cardiff, so all today, we're not talking huge journeys.
No, not at all. It'll only take a few minutes to go from Pontcanna to Llandaff. And of course you can walk from Llandaff into the city through the fields.
Emily, what do you think will be going through his mind?
I think
as he prepares to touch down now.
I think he is going to be very well prepared for the day ahead. You can only imagine how exhausted he must be after the past 7 days or more. He literally hasn't had time to stop. Even yesterday, people were talking about it being a day of reflection for him, but he had phone calls with heads of state and world leaders all day long, as far as I can tell. He will be looking forward, I think, to meeting people. Not just the officials and dignitaries waiting for him, but I'm told he's keen to get out and meet people who've come to see him.
And we can see the helicopter about to touch down. And the particular dynamic here, Barry, is that for decades and decades, over 60 years, Prince of Wales.
Yes.
And in the next few moments, the first time, the countless occasions he's been to Wales, the first time he arrives
as king.
As king.
Yeah. It'll be interesting, I think, to see what Prince William makes of that role now. Because obviously, as Emily has just said, King Charles can't have the same kind of involvement, although he will remain attached to Wales, as we saw the Queen was. But nevertheless, it'll be interesting to see what Prince William will make of the role and how he will link up with Wales.
I think my understanding is that he's planning to take some
I'm sure he
time
will.
to fully get to grips. He wants to really listen and understand, and and work out how he can best contribute, I think.
And of course, he knows Wales because, of course, he lived on Anglesey for 2 or 3 years. And the people of Roseneiger, where he was a pilot at RAF Valley, were very protective of him. And, you know, if somebody wanted to know where he lived, they'd send them off in the wrong direction.
And there we can see the royal vehicle just approaching the helicopter. Oh, we're just waiting to catch the first glimpse of the King, as we said, on his first steps into Wales as King, after such a long time as Prince of Wales. And there it is. History made, Barry.
Absolutely, absolutely. And he will arrive at the cathedral in a few minutes, and he'll be greeted by the acting dean, because at the minute there is no dean in Llandaff. And Michael Comer, who is the Archdeacon of Margam, is the acting dean, so he will greet him, I think, as indeed will the Bishop of Llandaff, my successor, and my successor was Archbishop of Wales, Andrew John, who's the Bishop of Bangor. What people don't realise, of course, is that Llandaff
So he's just been greeted by Morfudd Meredydd, the Lord Lieutenant of South Glamorgan. You probably heard a gun salute there, the 104 Regiment of the Royal Artillery. Chat there with the Lord Lieutenant, whose job it is to organise royal visits into South Wales and into her area. Someone, of course, he will know very well, like so many of the people he will meet today. In his previous role, will know extremely well, but now it's a different relationship, isn't it, Emily? It's a different time, it's a different era.
That's right. He is now head of state. He's head of the royal family, and he's there as king for the first time. It's something he's obviously had a very long apprenticeship for, and yet this is still a huge moment for him.
But I think it helps in Wales that he knows lots of these people already, so he's building on relationships that he's already got.
Well, of course, it's got to be a huge advantage, isn't it?
That's right.
In that sense.
Yeah, he's not coming into this cold by any means at all.
So we should just start to see a sense of the interaction with the crowds as he leaves Pontcanna Fields on a glorious day in Cardiff. A relatively short journey, as we've already said, up to the city of Llandaff, a city within the city, just in the northern suburbs of Cardiff. And Emily, you know, we touched on the debate about how he handles the role, etc. But today is twofold, I suppose. Primarily, and we will certainly see this at the start of the day, this is an official opportunity for people in Wales to remember his mother.
Absolutely. This is going to be the service of reflection first and foremost, and we're going to have this message of condolence as well in the Senate. But alongside this formal process of recognition, really, of his sorrow, there is this opportunity to be visible as king and to get among people, and I think that's very crucial at the moment.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Because we've seen it already in recent days, the extent to which he's done that in Scotland, in Northern Ireland, outside Buckingham Palace, and seems to enjoy it, clearly enjoys it. Is that your sense?
My sense is that he's taken great comfort from the crowds and the encouragement from all the kind words that people have said about obviously the late Queen, but also in terms of encouraging him and supporting him. I think certainly in being in London over the last few days, the reception he has had has been very warm. People, I think, were very moved by his address, and as Barry said earlier, he really did strike a chord with a lot of people who were watching, and I think whatever their opinions of him previously, they have seen a side of him that they perhaps didn't appreciate before.
And I think he's recognising the importance of devolution by going to Scotland, Northern Ireland and now Wales. And that's very important too. And very important that each of those nations has a chance to reflect and give thanks for the life of his late mother. And I think that's what primarily this service is about. It is a service of reflection and prayer for Queen Elizabeth II.
Yes, we're seeing the final piece in the jigsaw today to an extent, aren't we, with the union, all within a matter of days after the Queen's death.
That's right. And it's long been planned that he should go to the 3 cities of the devolved nations, and then just before the funeral of his mother next Monday.
I think it's been called Operation Springtide, and this is the way that he has travelled the UK over the
That's
past
right.
week, and it's about being visible and about giving people an opportunity to remember his mother, but also to see him as monarch.
That's right.
So we can see the shots from the helicopter there of the royal car snaking its way through the city. We will start to see it approach Llandaff fairly soon, where we know the crowds have gathered and have been gathering
Right.
from the early hours of this morning, where the official events of the day will start with this service of reflection to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Sounds like a very warm reception.
Yes. It's coming up the high street in Llandaff.
We know a number of the schools got all the pupils out, we can see that. And you're getting a sense of the excitement there, aren't we, which is obviously an integral part of the day.
Yeah.
There's history being made, and Llandaff is a very small part of Cardiff, of the city in itself. This is a huge moment.
But it's a huge moment for Wales, Barry Morgan.
Sorry?
It's a huge moment for Wales.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And of course, the seat of the Archbishop keeps on moving around. The Bishop of Bangor is now the Archbishop, but all national services will take place and do take place in the cathedral in Llandaff because, of course, it's near Cardiff. These streets have been closed for the past week, in fact.
Some lovely scenes there as the convoy of cars works its way through these very narrow streets in this village, part of Cardiff, as it approaches the main entrance to the cathedral. As the car approaches the entrance to Llandaff Cathedral, I'll pass you over to my colleague, Gareth Lewis.
Nick, thank you. It is a wonderful setting, even the weather doing its best this morning. The cathedral in a little hollow hidden from view, even hidden from view of those at the top of the hill. It's intimate and private, and also very public at the same time, with the eyes of the whole world on what's happening in Llandaff here this morning. The royal couple being greeted by Sir Brooke Boothby, the Vice Lord Lieutenant of South Glamorgan. And then, as we've seen throughout the course of the week, the greetings before the entrance to the service itself. That's Sir Robert Buckland, the Welsh Secretary at Westminster, the first to greet the King. And next to him, Mark Drakeford, Wales's First Minister, who's giving one of the readings later. Next to Mr. Drakeford is Rosaleen Moriarty-Simmons, who's the High Sheriff, a tireless campaigner, and she's actually the lead of the Thalidomide Memorial. You'd have sensed, I think, this morning too, the excitement. Yes, it's sombre, yes, there'll be dignity, but the crowd absolutely delighted to get their first glimpse of the King on Welsh soil, and a moment that I'm sure no one here today will ever forget. Now, the police officer is Jeremy Vaughan, by the way, the Chief Constable of South Wales Police, appointed during Wales's firebreak lockdown during the pandemic. And then the gentleman with the grey hair, with the robes, is Michael Comor, the acting Dean of Llandaff Cathedral, and he'll then introduce the leaders of other faiths. That's Abdul Azim Ahmed, who's chair of the Muslim Council in Wales, and the gentleman with the white beard is the Reverend Aled Edwards, Chief Executive of Catene, Churches Together in Wales, and he's got it this morning too, always has a smile for whoever he speaks to and a warm word and a story to tell, and I'm sure he'll have many more to tell after this morning. Every one of those religious leaders will give a prayer during the service. And that's June Osborne, the Bishop of Llandaff, one of the original 1,500 women ordained in England back in 1994 as priests. She's only Wales's second ever female bishop. She's had some momentous days before. This may well be the most momentous of the lot. And next to her is the Archbishop of Wales, who's also the Bishop of Bangor, the Most Reverend Andrew John. The cross you can see is the Metropolitical Cross, which is always carried before the Archbishop of Wales in procession. And as the religious leaders make their way in, final words from Michael Comor before the royal party enters the cathedral. The acting Dean very relaxed in rehearsals yesterday and looks completely at ease this morning too. 440 people from all walks of life across Wales waiting for this service of reflection, of remembrance, thanksgiving to begin.
Y rydym wedi ymgynnull ger bron y hollallog ddiw i offromi diolch am fywyd a'n grasisaf a glwyddau sofran y Frenhines Elizabeth yr Ail, am ei chadernid a'i hymroddiad i'w galwad gysegredig, am ei diwrder a'i haddurliad cyson o'i dyletswydd i bobl y deyrnos hon a'r gymanwlad. As we entrust her to our Redeemer and Lord, in whose promises she gained assurance and hope, we pray for our most gracious Sovereign Lord, King Charles III, that God may grant him peace in these days of mourning, wisdom as he faces the challenges of sovereignty, and grace to accept the mantle of his calling. We turn to our Heavenly Father in the words our Saviour taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
The congregation will now sing Psalm 121, set to music by Henry Walford Davis, who was master of the King's music between 1934 and 1941.
Darlleniad o lyfr gyntaf y Brenhinoedd. Aeth y brenin i aberthu i Gibeion. Honno oedd y brif uchelfa, 1000 o boeth offrymau a offrymau Solomon ar allor yno. Ymddangosodd yr arglwydd I Solomon yn Gibeion mewn breuddwyd liw nos. A dywedodd Duw, gofyn beth bynnag a fyny gennyf. Dywedodd Solomon, buos yn ffyddlon iawn i'm tad Dafydd dy was, am iddo rodio gyda thi mewn gwirionedd a chyfiawnder a chwirdeb calon. Ie, parhaist yn ffyddlon iawn iddo, a roi iddo fab I eistedd ar a'i orseddfaen ceddiw. A nawr o arglwydd fy niw, gwnaethos dy was yn frenin, yn lle fy nhad Dafydd, a minnau'n llanc, ifanc, dibrofiad. Ac y mae dy wasg anghanol dy ddewis bobl, sy'n rhi nyferus i'w rifo neu cyfrif. Felly, ro eith wasg galon ddeallus I farnu dy bobl, I ddairnad da a drwg, oherwydd pwy a ddichon farnu dy bobl luosog hyn. Bu'n dderbyniol a golwg yr arglwydd I Solomon ofyn y peth hwn, a dywedodd Duw wrtho. Oherwydd I ti ofyn hyn, a nid gofyn I ti dy hun blynyddoedd lawer, na cyfoeth, nac einioes dy elynion, ond gofyn deall wrth rando achos gwnaf ar ôl dy eiriau. Roddaf I ti galon ddoeth a deallus, fel na byd y fath o'r flaen, a na chyfyd chwaith ar dy ôl. Roddaf hefyd I ti ar hyn nis gofynaist, sef gyffoeth a gogoniant, fel na bydd dy fath ymysg brenhinoedd, dy holl ddyddiau di. Ac os bydd I ti rodio yn fy ffyrdd, a chadw fy neddfau am gochmynion, fel y rodiodd dy dad Dafydd, estynaf dy ddyddiadau hefyd. Deffrodd Solomon, a tywyddoli mae breuddwyd oedd. Dyma air yr arglwydd, a fod I fi.
A reading about what it takes to be a good leader. It's the story of God imparting wisdom to King Solomon in a dream. The next reader, we've seen her already, greeting the royal party, will be the Lord Lieutenant of South Glamorgan, Morfudd Meredydd.
A reading from the Gospel according to St. Matthew. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain. And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Dear friends, we have come together this morning to give thanks to God for the life of Queen Elizabeth II. Here in Wales, we join with the whole United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, and with people across the world to grieve her passing. We remember her service and dedication. This was truly a life of grace and wisdom. Today we recognise too the sorrow of our new king and his family. In their grief, we assure them of our love and care for them and of our prayers. Your Majesties, it is an honour to welcome you here and to have been invited to host this service. Wrth i ni fyfyrio ar ei bywyd, rydym yn ymestyn yn ôl ar draws yr oesoedd. Aeth ernasiad o dros 70 mlynedd oedd yr hiraf o unrhyw monarch Brydeinig. A'r ail hiraf a gofnodwyd o unrhyw monarch mewn gwlad sofran. A'n rhydeddwn heddi etifeddiaeth ryfeddol o wasanaeth a defosiwn sydd heb gyfartal yn hanes ein cenedl. Across the country, many have recognised the impact our late Queen had on public life, as well as in the lives of individuals. On how from the earliest days she transformed the monarchy, bringing an accessibility to a country still emerging from the ravages of war. Her skills of diplomacy are well known, but she had the ability to relate to the man or the woman on the Clapham omnibus, or here, the Merthyr Tydfil omnibus. To the person on the street, with an attentiveness that made you feel you were valued, you were understood. Born perhaps of her experience as a mother, grandmother and great-grandmother, as much as Queen. This kind of skill is learned over the decades and by interacting with life in all of its joys and sorrows. When matched with the dignity of her office, it is lifted to a higher level still. A Christian word for this is grace. The Queen shaped her role within a constitutional monarchy with its boundaries and its responsibilities. Her ability to influence, to utilise soft power, no less significant, no less authoritative, illustrates the wise and careful thought she brought to her role. Prime Ministers found that she was a trusted confidant. Her attention to matters of government, her knowledge of world events, and the longevity of her reign gave her an unmatched perspective and ability to see the distant scene. Parhaodd yr arweinyddiaeth hon ar draws cyfnod o newid aruthrol, diwylliannol a gwleidyddol, ond I ni, chynigodd y sail I hyder drwy ganolbwyntio ar bethau a barhaodd. Roedd ei chysondeb mewn y cyfnod o her genedlaethol yn rhoi sicrwydd. Nid oedd hyn erioed yn fwy felly na phan ddarlledodd neges i'r genedl yn ystod a pandemig. But we also saw a monarch who could surprise and delight us. We will never look at a jar of marmalade again in the same way, nor watch Mr. Bond without remembering 2012 and that extraordinary leap into the void. Her late Majesty was also a towering figure on the world stage, embodying stability and continuity. But perhaps more than that, values which are shared across nations and cultures. She received countless heads of state, as well as innumerable prime ministers. And it was her abiding trustworthiness, as well as her hospitality, which kindled friendship and confidence. In her role as head of the Commonwealth, she presided over a growing fellowship of nations, and she embraced our diverse histories, cultures, and languages, delighting in the sheer variety of this unique assembly. And at times when countries threatened to forsake each other, she displayed the skillful use of that soft power which I mentioned earlier, that way of exercising power that has reach and depth. In Wales, that skill was never more evident than when she visited Aberfan in 1966, that community finding her presence deeply consoling, and Her Majesty would return 4 more times to that community. In one of our Bible readings, we heard of Solomon's request for the gift of wisdom at a time of significant change and transition. Solomon following David as king. As Wales gains an even stronger sense of nationhood and our place within the world, we should still remember that shared traditions count. On St. David's Day in 2006, the Queen marked a new chapter in the life of our country when she opened our Senedd. Y mae ein gwreiddiau fel pobl yn y ddwfn. Mae'n y diwylliant a'n iaith, ein straeon a'n chwedlau yn ein gosod mewn y trefdadaeth unigryw. Ond hefyd yn ein harwain ymlaen at ddyfodol a gaddewid a photensial. Mae arnom angen y gras a'r doethineb a ddangoswyd gan y fren llunes wrth i ni gydweithio I adeiladu cymdeithas lywyrchus a thosturiol. Finally, many of us will recall with gladness her deep and committed Christian faith, which shaped her sense of duty and public service from as early as 1947, when she pledged her life to the service of God and the people. In celebrating her 90th birthday, she reaffirmed the importance of faith, saying, "I have and remain very grateful to God for his steadfast love. I have indeed seen his faithfulness." Hers was a personal faith. She spoke of Jesus Christ and her relationship with him, as well as his teachings, and the way that his life, death, and resurrection opened the possibility for new life, for restored relationships, and a commitment to a kingdom not of this world. And so I end with her own words as she reflected on the meaning of Christmas for what turned out to be the last time. Having lost her beloved husband and yet found consolation in the love and support shown to her from across the world, she said, "It is this simplicity of the Christmas story that makes it so universally appealing. Simple happenings that form the starting point of the life of Jesus, a man whose teachings have been handed down from generation to generation and have been the bedrock of my faith. His birth marked a new beginning. As the carol says, the hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight." We thank God for this faith and this life, so full of grace and wisdom. Amen.
The Apostle Paul, writing to the Christians in Philippi, encouraged them with these words: "Have no anxiety, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." Let us, seeking that peace, pray to the Lord.
Lord God, we give thanks for the life and reign of your servant, our most gracious sovereign, Queen Elizabeth. Anointed by you to be both sovereign and servant of others, she governed and graced the life of Wales with love, dignity and courage, rooted in a living faith in you as her guide and strength. Grant to her the peace and life promised to your faithful servants. Lord of life and promise, Lord, give us your peace.
We hold before you our most gracious King Charles III. May your wisdom inform him, your illumination guide his heart, and your truth inspire his words and actions. May he serve in righteousness and truth, doing justice. Rabbana, grant us peace. Lord of the call to serve, Lord, give us your peace.
Yr ydym yn cydnabod cyflwr drosiedig, cenhedloedd a chymunedau aneirif ar draws y byd, a bywydau chwilfryw lliaws, o'i gwir, a'i gwragedd, a'i plant, ac wrth gydnabod, gweddiwn dros bawb y mae grym a dylanwad yn ei dwylo. Boed iddynt ei defnyddio i sefydlu heddwch ymysg y cenhedloedd, a phlannu heddwch ym mhob calon. Newidier a throer gwell, feddyliau a gweithredoedd yr rhai sy'n diystyru'r ymgais am heddwch. Arglwydd pobloedd a chenhedloedd, arglwydd dyroi ni dy dangnefedd.
We pray for those whose lives are troubled by sorrow, suffering, abuse or neglect. We pray for the marginalised and persecuted, for refugees and victims of natural disasters. May their needs be seen, may their cries be heard, and in recognition and answering of their needs, may they find strength and peace and a sure knowledge of the love which you have for them. Lord of healing and wholeness, Lord, give us your peace.
We pray for ourselves and the lives we live day by day. Give us a deep knowledge of that peace which is your gift, and too often beyond human understanding. By thought, word, and deed, may we be your instruments for that peace in our time and in your world. Lord of hope and truth, Lord, give us your peace.
Heavenly Father, your Son, Jesus Christ, has promised that when we meet in his name and pray according to his mind, he will be among us and will hear our prayer. In your love and mercy, fulfill our prayers, that all for whom we have prayed will know your peace in heart and mind and being. We pray through Christ our Lord.
The Lord be with you. And also with you. Our help is in the name of the Lord. Who made heaven and earth. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now and forever. Almighty Father, we bless your holy name for all who have completed their earthly course and are now at rest. We remember before you this day your servant, Queen Elizabeth, rendering thanks for the gift of her friendship and for her life of service and devotion. And we pray for our King and all of the royal family. A bendith Duw holl a lliog, a tad, a mab a'r ysbryd glân, a fo yn eich plith ac a drigo gyda chwi yn wastad. Amen.
And that concludes the service of prayer and reflection for the life of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Moving, poignant, but at the same time, uplifting, even humorous at times. A celebration of a long life, well lived and well loved. And for all of those here, an undeniable excitement at getting to see and even to meet the new monarch, King Charles III, and the Queen Consort, Camilla. Some very familiar hymns. Come Rhondda, guide me, O thy great Redeemer, with its message of a pilgrimage through life, asking God to provide for us and to bring us safely to heaven. A poignant and a very popular choice. The royal couple now making their way to the visitors' book, which they will sign, and there's plenty of royal significance here. It was signed by Prince William in 1991 on St David's Day when he was just 8 years old, his first official royal engagement. And we got a little one of those non-verbal insights into William. He signed the book with his left hand. And the pen clearly worked, which is a relief. Yeah, warm words from the King for the Bishop of Llandaff. So too for Andrew John, the Archbishop of Wales, who'll remember this day. A real nod to the modern face of the monarchy with his stories of the Queen having sandwiches with Paddington Bear and then jumping out of the helicopter before the Olympics with James Bond, and laughter again. I think he'll tell the story many times about how he managed to make the King chuckle at the marmalade reference during the reading. And this is a lovely moment coming up. The little girl he can just see is young Kira Hillibert, who's at the Cathedral Sunday School. She's going to present the Queen Consort with that Posey. She was born in Wales, Kira, to American parents. That's her mum, Chrissy. She's only just become a British citizen, and she received her British passport on the morning of the Queen's death. She was really excited yesterday. She was really excited this morning too. She's got her favourite shoes and dress on for the occasion, apparently.
What a moment for that little girl as the King and the Queen Consort come out into the blazing sunshine after rousing renditions of Mein Hen Vlad Fy Nadau and God Save the King. So from one Archbishop of Wales to one former Archbishop of Wales, Barry Morgan, what did you make of the service?
I thought the service was absolutely splendid. I mean, it covered all the bases. The three hymns, I think, were very well chosen. One by Rhys Nicholas, who was a nonconformist minister, who won a prize for his hymn singing. And Te Deum Wnaeth y Wyrth is very Christocentric hymn. And we've heard that the Queen spoke about her personal relationship to Jesus, and that hymn reflects that. Then the other hymn, God is Love, Let Heaven Adore Him, written by one of my predecessors as Bishop of Llandaff. He was bishop during the 1930s. He was a monk of the Community of the Resurrection, and that hymn is lovely. God is Love, Let Heaven Adore Him. And where he talks, and when human hearts are breaking under sorrow's iron rod, then they find that self-same making deep within the heart of God. In other words, when we are going through desperate times ourselves, then we are assured through Jesus Christ that God is there too. And the last verse there about sin and death and hell shall never o'er the universe reign, but love will have the last word. So again, reflecting the Queen's faith. And then, of course, Cum Ronda at the end, Guide Me, O Thou Great Redeemer, sung both in English and in Welsh.
Yes, and sung with a lot of hoil and gusto. And Emily, Andrew John, the Archbishop of Wales, really quite a contemporary outlook. Gareth alluded to it there, talking about how the Queen transformed the monarchy, appealed to the man and woman on the Merthyr Tydfil omnibus.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. You know, she, in life, as she has done in death, really unified people and brought people together from all walks of life. And I think that the sermon really reflected that. It was very touching, but also humorous, as we heard there with the talk of marmalade sandwiches.
Yeah, indeed. We saw lightness of touch throughout that service, as well as events marking the solemnity of the occasion. Right, let's go back to Gethin Jones now, who's outside the cathedral.
Diolch, Nick. Yes, some lovely light touches, as everyone was mentioning there, especially with little Kira as she approached Camilla, the Queen Consort. She walked out. A really lovely moment. Simon Weston and Tim Rhys-Evans watching the service too. Your thoughts, reflections on that service, Tim?
I thought it was beautiful. I thought, you know, it really showed Wales. Lovely to hear so much Welsh language in there. 3 great Welsh hymn tunes, Plant of Edward, Cwm Rhondda and Blaen Wern. And I thought the choir and the performance of the work by Paul Miller showed a contemporary side of music in Wales as well.
Yeah.
So
we enjoyed watching, and it was hard not to start singing as well. So the 3 of us started singing with those hymns, and I think you mentioned at the time it was the togetherness that you see in the cathedral this morning that was special.
It's the warmth. Everybody seems just to feel so privileged to be here and to enjoy the occasion. And I think that's what's so special. You know, when you have these occasions, you have to really enjoy it, because they don't happen in too many lifetimes, that's for sure.
Yeah. I'm hoping we'll be joined by Catherine Finch, who is performing in Cathedral. I know you're good friends with Catherine.
Yeah,
before she gets here now, you can talk about her. How do you think she would have been feeling during that service?
Well, I happened to be with Catherine last night, and we were talking about this. And, you know, Catherine is an extremely experienced professional, but when you're performing at any occasion of this stature, there's always going to be those nerves, and you know, any professional musician wants to do a great job. I mean, the job is to control the nerves, but yeah, there would have been a free song, despite however many years you've been playing for.
I could tell you could see her in your periphery. I think Catherine's about to join us now. Come and join us, Catherine. Come in. Lovely to see you. There you go. You're under pressure there, Tim, talking about Catherine in front of her. Nice gwelch, Catherine. Lovely to see you. How was it in there? Are you able to enjoy the experience whilst concentrating on the job in hand?
Yeah, I mean, you just absorb it. It's happened. You know, you're there, and it's such a privilege, isn't it, to be a part of such an important event, really. And and it's something that I will, and everyone here will look back on in many years to come.
It was so beautiful, such a wonderful performance. We're seeing the King now make his way up towards Llandaff village, where you may greet a few people. Simon, you would have been there before. What kind of experience would that be like for people meeting the King Charles?
Well, for the school children along there,
I'll be seeing it behind us.
I'm 61. You mean what the 9-10-year-olds are going to be feeling like? I couldn't tell you. But for anybody else that gets to meet the royal family, you know, it's an incredibly special moment. People turn out for these things and they remember them for the rest of their lives. I remember the first time I ever saw royals was back in Nelson, and it was Princess Margaret opening the waterboard there. And I still remember that from being a child. You know, so I think these will remember it for the rest of their days as well.
Yeah. Tim, of course, so many people preparing for today. It would have taken over life for the last week or so, wouldn't it?
Oh my goodness, yeah. And obviously you can't plan for a royal death despite the preparations that do go. You know, there is going to be that short period of time. So to turn everything around and get performers like Catherine, you know, it's a huge job of logistics.
Yeah. Catherine, could I ask you what you think would be going through his mind now? You were the royal harpist 2000, 2004, the Prince of Wales's harpist back then. You know him quite well. How do you think he'd be feeling today?
Well, I'm sure he's in very mixed emotions, isn't he? I mean, he's lost his mother, so but yet he has this such great and huge role to fill, and so, but he is, as you can see, he is a very friendly and warm person, and I'm sure the crowds there will be feeling that from him, and I'm sure he is thinking about the path on his journey ahead.
We, of course, as broadcasters, have been making plans throughout the week, but one thing we have seen with King Charles is the amount of time he spent around the four nations with the crowd, isn't it? He's been keen to speak to people and carry out his duty.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's very typical of the person he is, actually, and in my years of knowing him and being around him and being at events that he's been at, he's always behaved in that way and wanted to be with the people. And you know, I think, especially here in Wales, obviously as the Prince of Wales, I think he had a certain fondness for Welsh culture, for our heritage and for our language, and a great respect for that. So I think he has embraced that over the years.
I think he's gone away with a few souvenirs as well from some local school children there who've looked like they've made a mug with some photos on there as he makes his way to meet school children from all over Cardiff, actually. Simon, you mentioned before that one other thing he does bring is sense of humour, like his mother before him.
Oh, very much so. His father and his mother, very funny people, had that wonderful twinkle and bit of devilment. So he carries that sense of humour. As Catherine was saying, he's an incredibly personable man, and he does like people, and he does always have something funny to say. He always does have something very pertinent to say about things. Different occasions, different stories to tell.
What does he do now, Tim? I mean, there's so many people here today. They've all come out to pay their respects and to get a glimpse of the new king. He could be there for quite a while.
Well, absolutely, but you know, with all the formality, you know, 8 days ago this man lost his mum, and he has visited every nation. He has sat through so many ceremonies, that 40-minute walk from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall. I'm sure the comfort that he's getting from the love that he's being shown today by meeting people must be a huge sense of comfort to him at this difficult time.
Yeah. The mood has changed quite a bit, hasn't it, Simon, during the past week? Of course, initially it was sad, sombre, a lot of reflection, but the last couple of days around the UK, actually, with people queuing to see Her Majesty lying in state, especially in London, a real sense of camaraderie and more talk of the celebration of the life.
This is what happens when people have a bereavement, the initial shock and sadness that comes with all of that, and then you start to remember the good times. You remember people, you remember family, friends, and moments where they were much happier times. And I think this is what eventually the King and the Queen Consort will have had time to do, to remember the happier times and remember the fun times they had together. You know, the sadness is gone for that part, but now you have to move on. And there's still a heck of a lot to go. They still have a heck of a lot to actually go through, but with the coronation and the investiture of the Prince of Wales, and probably the most sombre thing, which is the funeral of the Queen, which is not something I suspect they're looking forward to too much.
Lots of phones, little babies, people of all ages. Handshakes, a few fist pumps as well.
Sign of the times.
Yeah, all the generations covered as he makes his way towards Llandaff village. So walking away from the cathedral towards the top of the little hill of Llandaff village before he makes his way to the Senedd. Of course, everyone here to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen. And Tim is someone you met a few times
I was very privileged to meet the Queen on several occasions with performances, and when I got my MBE at Buckingham Palace, and I think that occasion really sticks in my mind because it was an opportunity to take my nana to Buckingham Palace, and the joy that she got from that day. And in fact, as we were leaving the palace, some tourists came up to us and said, "We're from Japan, please can we have a photo with the Queen?" Because they thought my nana was the Queen. And they ended up taking photos of Nan. So I love the thought that perhaps there's a photo of my nana, you know, on a mantelpiece somewhere. Yeah, but it was a great honour to meet her, and I mean, I think today just shows the sense of admiration, love and gratitude that people have for everything she brought to the country.
That's actually a sentiment we've seen quite a lot this week with various messages I've seen, that she felt like everyone's grandmother, didn't she?
Well, I think so. And you know, just by the outpouring of emotion and the way the country has responded, is proof, I think, to her legacy that she'll leave behind, and to the person she was. And what a great and remarkable woman she was.
Of course, these events are meticulously planned, but I'm getting the feeling that even His Majesty's own staff are not really quite sure how long he'll be there for. It must be, Simon, without doubt, one of the nicest parts of what he does, which is getting to meet the people he serves.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it is for them as well. You know, he's meeting all the people that have come out to see him, and the Queen Consort. But you know, they're all loving this. They'll talk about this for the rest of their lives. It's a logistical and security nightmare for all the staff that are around him. But you know, that's one of the joys, isn't it? That he is so personable, and he does care, and he does want to meet people, and he'll have his own stories and memories of this as well.
I do enjoy his relationship with the Queen Consort, Camilla. Just watching today, a little aside, a little joke, a little smile. They're very much experiencing this together, aren't they?
It was lovely when they arrived by helicopter and went to get in the car, and he was talking to that corporal, and when the Queen Consort pulled his arm and said, "Come on, we've got to go." I thought, how normal.
At least someone's keeping him to time.
Yeah, how normal that was, you know, in these incredible times.
Flowers, even a mug to take with him from Llandaff Cathedral this morning. Of course, his first visit to Wales in his new role as King. And for Camilla, Queen Consort, who also has some flowers. Catherine, are the nerves gone? Are you able just to enjoy this now as a viewer and relax?
I can take a deep breath. It's like, you know, even however many times you've played and performed, there is always a certain degree of nervousness before an event like this, you know.
Of course.
So, yeah, it's just, it makes you smile, doesn't it, to see these scenes.
It's very strange for me as a local boy as well. I was brought up 200 yards away from here, and I've never seen a procession like this come through Llandaff village, and I'm sure it'll be a day that so many will remember for a long time. So the motorcade eventually will make their way to Cardiff Castle at the end of the day, but now they all make their way to the Senedd for a motion of condolence. But as they make their way in front of a massive crowd that is here, has come out to see them today, and a memory I'm sure they will cherish. Catherine? Tim, Simon, thank you very much for your company this morning.
Diolch yn
So
fawr.
good to see you. Diolch yn fawr.
Gethin, thank you very much indeed, and some lovely contributions there from Simon Weston, Tim Rhys-Evans and Catherine Finch. Emily Nash, Royal Editor for Hello Magazine. It's now a familiar sight, this, isn't it? This very tactile approach that he's got with the crowds. I guess you've seen it a lot yourself.
I have seen it,
but
on many occasions.
He is now under the spotlight so much more, isn't he?
That's right. I think people forget he's obviously very experienced at this, but now he is in the full glare of the world's media, and people are noticing, you know, the way he interacts with people. He's very warm, he's very funny, and he has a way of connecting with people. So I'm sure there were lots of jokes to the school children about getting a morning off school. I've heard him say that a few times in the past, but he just has a good way of reaching out. And I think it goes back to what was said in the sermon about the way the Queen was able to connect with depth and with reach. And it is something that he's obviously learned from her.
And just briefly, Simon Weston touched on it for the kind of schedulers and the people planning his day. It will make it more difficult.
It's a bit of a tightrope walk, isn't it? Because they have a strict schedule. Let's not forget he has to be at a vigil later on today at Westminster Hall with his siblings. He's got 2 other locations to visit in Cardiff this morning, and yet he wants to give people his time, so they have to sort of gauge the situation and move him on as they need to.
And Barry Morgan, just to get your final reflections on the day, the service that we've gone through, and this, the recollections of the late Queen.
Yeah, I think it was absolutely splendid service, and I think it was Archbishop Robert Runcie, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 1980s, who said that monarchy puts a human face on the operations of government, and that's precisely what Charles did this morning, I think, and that's what his late mother did as well. That people can identify with that, and it humanises the institution and makes people feel that they belong to a country and that they are important.
Dr. Barry Morgan, former Archbishop of Wales, and Emily Nash, both, thank you very much for your contributions today.
Thank you.
So as we know, Queen Elizabeth was the longest reigning British monarch, which made her son the longest serving Prince of Wales. Let's take a look at Charles's long-established relationship with Wales.
The tradition of the monarch's eldest son becoming Prince of Wales dates back to the 14th century. And Charles held that title for longer than any other Prince of Wales in history.
What an ovation for Prince Charles. It was his first public visit to the Principality since he was given the title Prince of Wales.
Prince Charles was just 9 years old in 1958 and at school when the news went public.
We were all watching the television. I remember being acutely embarrassed for a little boy of 9. It was rather bewildering.
The official investiture was to take place 11 years later. As part of the ceremony would be in Welsh, Prince Charles was enrolled at Aberystwyth University to learn the basics of the language.
It's quite a heavy syllabus. He'll have his plate quite full.
Tutor and well-known Republican Teddy Millward was charged with teaching the young prince.
He was quite easy to get on with, I must say. He learned quite quickly and quite well.
1969, the year of the investiture, was a time of rising Welsh nationalism, and there were fierce protests across the country. But for many in Wales, it was a thrilling occasion, and the anticipation reached fever pitch.
Hello and good evening from Carnarvon. You can just about cut the atmosphere with a knife as the excitement builds up to the climax, which will be reached here at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon.
It was the biggest royal event since the coronation.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb.
Millions around the world watched as the Queen formally presented her son to the Welsh people.
For me, it's a way of officially dedicating one's life, or part of one's life, to Wales.
In the half-century which has followed, this dedication has developed into a very personal connection. As well as championing existing ventures, he's also inspired new projects, including the restoration of Greek Castle in North Wales.
I used to pass Grich Castle every day to and from school, so I saw it fall into dereliction and was shocked by the level of disrepair and vandalism. So, in a moment of desperation, I wrote to the Prince of Wales, and to my amazement, he wrote back, wanting me to try and save the castle for the nation. I ended up meeting the Prince about a year or so after the first letter.
That meeting led Mark to set up a trust to rescue the castle.
It's all come from that initial passion that he had for history and architecture.
The Prince's strong views on architecture were well known. When he bought a home in Wales in 2007, Llandaff was restored in a way which would reduce its environmental impact, with a focus on traditional Welsh materials. Emlyn Morgan is one of his neighbours.
You know, he's one of us. When I greet him now, I always greet him welcome home, and I think that's very important.
He has been a powerful advocate for farming, helping Wales's beleaguered rural communities through his charities. And a long-time patron of Welsh arts, Charles also revived the role of royal harpist for the first time since the 1870s.
The Prince specifically asked if it could be for a young Welsh harpist. So it was his way of giving some support to a young musician coming out of Wales.
It's clear His Majesty holds in deep affection the country he has served for so long.
Doesn't matter if you're young, old, black or white, he's got time for everybody. And people like that in this part of the world.
So as the royal couple make their way to the Senedd, let's get some different perspectives now on the new king. I'm joined by Professor Sir Dane Hopkin, a historian and academic, and Kim Howells, former Labour MP for Pontypridd and former government minister under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Welcome to both of you. Aberystwyth formed part of that piece there. You were at Aberystwyth at the same time. What was it like?
Well, I have to tell you, Nick, I wasn't in Vision, but I actually was there for that clip, which you've just seen when he arrived. It was quite a moment because, to be honest, we couldn't quite understand why we'd been chosen, but we were delighted that the university was being recognised in this way. He arrived, there was a lot of excitement. I can't recollect any protests in Aberystwyth at that moment, but maybe somebody saw something I didn't. What is really interesting, though, is that after that arrival, he then became a student. He joined Pantycelyn Hall. He was mixing with the other students. There were no lectures going on at that time. It was a summer term, and therefore he had a tutor. We in the department didn't teach him. I mean, he had his own tutor, and he was taught by Teddy Millward, who you saw that in the film, to learn to speak Welsh. But you know, it was a very light visit in the sense that there was no security guards around, you couldn't see police wandering around, and there were a lot of well-wishers every day hoping to see him. But generally speaking, it was quite low-key until, of course, then came the investiture.
Yeah, of course, very different era. And Kim Howells, people may not know this, but you've kind of developed a relationship through art with the king.
Yeah, I made some very controversial comments about the Turner Prize one year. And out of the blue, I suddenly got this handwritten letter from the Prince saying, I agree with every word. And then we started to talk about art and about what he liked and what I liked. Not exactly the same things. And then I realised that he was actually a very passionate painter and a gifted painter. He really works at it. And over the years, we actually exchanged paintings. He's got one of mine, and I've got one of his.
A relationship, presumably, you never thought would ever happen?
My father was a communist. My mother described herself as chapel, but was even more radical than he was. They were certainly not. They were Republicans in every sense, really. And I'm deep down, I think. I've been a Republican until quite recently. Now I've got a kind of philosophy which says this is a great country, it's a wonderful country, and it works. And if it works, don't fix it. And I've become a bit of a royalist.
In your dealings, you've met the king as well. How did you find him?
Well, I have to say, we saw earlier how, in fact, scheduling his visits is a bit of a problem, because he does want to break ranks and go meet people. And we had a very clear example of that in the centenary of Passchendaele, when he came to the Welsh Memorial in Llandaff, and of course the centenary of Hedd Wynn's death as well. So a very moving moment. And he came and he spoke. He dressed in Welsh as well. It was a very lovely moment. But when the time came for him to leave, do you think he would? He kept on mixing the audience, kept on moving in. I could see the security guards tearing their hair out and saying, you know, please, can you move along? But he wanted to talk to people. He wanted to shake their hands. He wanted to be there. And I suspect, had they said, do you want to stay on? I think he would have said yes. But, of course, he had to move on to the real big event in the evening. But that's the kind of tactile, that kind of, you know, engaging with people have now seen. We saw it the very first day, and that has always been the case. And I think that approachability will probably serve him very well. Whatever people may say about republicanism, whatever may people say about monarchy, although I'm very surprised that Kim is now become a royalist, but that's another story.
Pushing it a bit.
But the truth is that, you know, we now recognise that there is a new relationship to be built with Wales.
Yeah, it's interesting what we saw today at Llandaff, just coming out of the cathedral then, in other words, is nothing new. It's been, in terms of that relationship with the public, it's been there for a while. We're now moving into a different phase of the visit today. He is on his way to the Senedd. And just to talk to you about the kind of relationship with politics, you know, you weren't involved in devolved politics, you were an MP at Westminster, but do you think some people have talked about this kind of new relationship now as the King? Of course, a lot of us know what his views are during his time as the Prince of Wales. To what extent will he have to change things, do you think, or could that pose problems?
It will be a problem, because he's very much involved in... He's got a great sense of curiosity. And so he's interested in politics, like he's interested in a lot of other subjects. But politics is always, that relationship between royals and British politics in general has always been very, very important to him. Now, my worry about the fact that he's now the king, and everybody's saying he's got to change, he's got to step back, he's not going to come out with opinions. He's going to find that very difficult, I think. And in many ways, I hope that he doesn't step that far back. I know that when he meets horrible dictators, he's going to have to say hello to them through gritted teeth. But I hope we can sense those gritted teeth, because I think that his views on liberty and on the need for democracy and freedom are very important. I want to see that in a king.
Briefly, you just wanted to...
Yes, I think also we are in a devolved world, and that wasn't the case when he became Prince of Wales. Things have changed in his own lifetime, and I think he now understands, and I hope he understands, the relationship between Wales and England, Scotland and Ireland isn't just a question of one nation. In fact, yes, one country, but we are 4 different nations, and we've got to recognise that.
Dayan, thank you very much indeed. Sorry to keep you short, Professor. Sir Dayan Hopkin and Kim Howells, thanks very much for your thoughts there. Right. As his king continues his journey towards Cardiff Bay, the south of the city, in the Senedd building, we can join Jason Mohammed, who's there for us.
Good afternoon, Nick. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Prynhawn da. Welcome to Cardiff Bay on a gloriously sunny day. Lots of people gathered outside the Senedd here today. And of course, now the beating heart of political democracy here in a very modern Wales. And it was back in 1999 when Her Majesty the Queen, accompanied by the Duke of Edinburgh and the Prince of Wales, officially opened the very first session of the newly created National Assembly for Wales, as I say, now known as Senedd Cymru. And today His Majesty the King and Queen Consort Camilla will be here to receive a motion of condolence in the building behind me, including the First Minister Mark Drakeford, presiding officer, the Llywydd, Right Honourable Elin Jones, and the Senedd members who are gathering inside the building as we speak ahead of the ceremony. Joining me to discuss what is going to happen this afternoon is Professor Laura McAllister from Cardiff University. Laura, a very good afternoon to you. And this building is a magnificent symbol of a very modern Wales that the King's about to see.
I think it is. It's a fantastic emblem of how much Wales has changed over the past 23 years since we've had devolution here. This fantastic building, designed by Lord Richard Rogers, in many ways was meant to encapsulate all that was new about the new Welsh democracy. A transparent building using natural light, a consensually designed debating chamber. But in many respects, the building itself shows how different Wales is now, of course, to the time when Her Majesty the Queen acceded to the throne back in the 1950s, when Wales had no effective democracy of its own.
And Laura, a very Welsh building that the people of Wales are very, very proud of.
I think they are, yes. A building designed by Lord Richard Rogers, but built entirely out of Welsh materials, Welsh wood, Welsh slate, Welsh steel from Port Talbot. And I think everything about the building is meant to represent the very new, modern Wales. The people of Wales are clearly very proud of this place. It's used for celebrations, and of course on days like today, less about celebration and more about respect and gratitude to the Queen and a recognition of the new King.
You and I were here in 2006 when the Senedd was opened by Her Majesty, and I remember we had a studio for BBC Wales Today. I was doing the evening news. I think you were here too.
I was.
We had a studio on the water, and the atmosphere here is quite similar, because what you've got here is a very respectful crowd. Lots of schools have travelled over from Penarth, just across the water there, because they wanted to be part of this historic occasion.
I think so. I mean, the mood is very sombre, clearly, a great deal of sadness after the death of the Queen, but also people wanting to be part of a historic moment. King Charles's first visit to Wales as part of his tour, of course, around all the nations of the United Kingdom. And I think it is significant that Wales features so prominently in that tour, because for King Charles and indeed for Queen Elizabeth, their recognition of devolution and the new political apparatus of Wales has been constant since devolution began and the National Assembly was established back in 1999, always present at every official opening, and indeed, as you say, Jason, at the opening of this magnificent building too, back in 2006.
Yep, absolutely. Right, the royal cars are arriving as the motorcade with the royal party comes around the corner, approaching the Senedd, to signify the arrival of His Majesty the King. In fact, we can go now to Sean Lloyd, who will be leading us through proceedings in the Senedd today. Sean.
Yes, a huge crowd gathered here in front of the Senedd, waiting for the cars to arrive. They are just around the corner, proceeding along the side of the Senedd building. Many people have their cameras up, waiting to take a photograph as the horses arrive. A cheer going up from the crowd. A huge cheer as the car pulls up in front of the building. And we can see the royal party now being met from their car by the Lord Lieutenant of South Glamorgan, Mrs. Morfydd Meredith, and a huge cheer from the crowds there. They will be heading up the steps of the Senedd building, past members of the armed forces, leading and lining the way, and representatives of the Navy, RAF and Army here today. The sun really beaming down on those crowds, on this very modern building, which has become part of the landscape of Cardiff Bay. A wave there from the King. Reaching the top of the steps. And waiting there to greet them. We can see Llywydd, the presiding officer, Elin Jones, shaking hands, and Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales. They are officially welcoming their Majesties. Seven-trumpet fanfare there, heralding His Majesty the King's arrival into the Neuadd, where we can see the King talking to Adam Price, leader of Plaid Cymru. He represents Carmarthen East and Dynevor in the Senedd. And waiting in line to be presented are the leaders of the political parties represented here in the Senedd. This is a very light and airy part of the building. And now meeting Jane Dodds, the leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, Senedd regional member for Mid and West Wales. And also being formally presented, Dirprwy Llywydd, Deputy Presiding Officer, David Rees. And all along, beautiful music accompanying them from the harp. This area is surrounded by glass, and it has a fantastic view out to Cardiff Bay. And there the King meets Manon Antoniazzi, the Chief Executive and Clerk of the Senedd. She was a senior private secretary in the office of the Prince of Wales. Now she has responsibility for running the machinery of the Senedd, staffing and the property. The Llywydd leading the way. And the First Minister and Llywydd escorting the King and Queen Consort downstairs to the Cwrt or court. And there we see the harp being played beautifully by Claire Jones, a former royal harpist. She was harpist to the Prince of Wales from 2007 to 2011. And now waiting for them in the Cwrt, two people who will play a key role in the more ceremonial elements of this motion of condolence. The Wales Herald of Arms Extraordinary, Thomas Lloyd, who we see there. He's actually an expert on the historic buildings of Wales. He's been Wales Herald since 2010, and also in front of him we see the mace bearer, Shazad Khan. they will be approaching the Siambr, which is the main debating chamber of the Senedd. So leading the procession there, the mace bearer, Shahzad Khan. Actually, he's a member of the security team here at the Senedd. Of course, the historic function of a mace bearer was to protect the monarch by beating off potential attackers, so quite a fitting role that he is playing here today. We can see the Queen Consort walking alongside the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, as they make their way through the court. And now they enter the Siambr. "60 Senedd members already waiting in here for them. It is the only completely round debating chamber in any of the parliaments of the UK. The mace bearer now making his way to place the mace in its sconce. And the royal party waiting there. That mace is made of gold, silver and brass.
Your Majesties, Senedd members, guests. Ar ran y Senedd gyfan, hoffwn estyn croeso cynnes i'w fawrhydi y brenin a mawrhydi Frenhines Gydweddog, ar eich ymweliad cyntaf ar Senedd ers marwolaeth trist y Frenhines. Estynwn ein cydymdeimlad cynnes i chi a'ch teulu oll. We welcome your Majesties to our Senedd today, and we offer our sincerest condolences on the sad death of your mother, the Queen. We know that so many of the people we represent have been saddened, some shaken by her loss, and they hold you and your family in their hearts and prayers at this time. As we meet here today to offer our motion of condolence, it is poignant for us to think that the Queen's final visit to Wales was merely 11 months ago at the official opening of our 6th Senedd. The Queen was in fine form that day. Many members shared their anecdotes of that visit when we met to pay tribute to the Queen and discussed our motion of condolence in the Senedd on Sunday. And as she left us that day, 11 months ago, I hope that Her Majesty carried with her the beaming smile of Ffion Gwythyr, the last person she met that day in Wales, the young actor from Furness in Llanelli, who smiled broadly as she handed the Queen a posy. The stories and tributes paid by members to the Queen when we convened on Sunday were warm and witty. As you may imagine, there were many mentions of corgis, her constant lifelong Welsh companions. Corgi, a Welsh word, literally small dog. And of course, the members here representing Pembrokeshire were particularly keen to champion a preference for the Pembrokeshire corgi. And the member for Ceredigion, me, was silent and ever so slightly jealous of the Queen's choice of the Pembrokeshire corgi over the Cardiganshire corgi. Mi oedd y Frenhines yn ein plith am bob un o 6 agoriad y Senedd hon, ac mi sylwodd bob tro ar dwf ein grymoedd a'n gweithredu ar ran pobl Cymru. Mi barchodd y Senedd yma fel mynegiant o ddymuniad democrataidd pobl Cymru. The Queen was with us in 1999 for the opening of our first fledgling assembly. She shared our journey of devolution. She partook in each of our 6 openings, commenting each time on the development of our powers in becoming a national parliament, Senedd Cymru. The Queen respected this parliament because she respected the democratic choices of the people of Wales. She saw us come of age and was interested in our next steps. From Glyndwr's first Senedd of the 15th century in Machynlleth to the one in which we are gathered today, our story is old, but our democracy is young and ambitious. It is my sincere hope that the modern relationship between this country, this Senedd, and the royal family will be rooted in respect and mutual understanding. Mae stori ein tir, ein cenedl yn hir, ond mae stori ein senedd yn newydd ac yn fodern. Mae'n llygaid at y dyfodol a bydd e'n cydweithio gyda chi y brenin a'r teulu brenhinol rwy'n mawr hyderu yn adlewyrchu hynny. As we remember today the Queen's enduring commitment to our Parliament, we also look forward to the King's future association with the Senedd and our work on behalf of the people of Wales. I now invite the First Minister to present the motion of condolence to His Majesty the King.
Llywydd eich mawr hydi, yn gynharach yr wythnos hon am y tro gyntaf yn ein hanes byr, fe wnaeth y Senedd cyfarfod ar ddydd Sul. Fe gwnaethon ni hynny i gytuno ar y cynnig o gydymdeimlad rydyn ni ei gyfleu y prynhawn yma. Fel Senedd ifanc, mae gymaint o hyn rydyn ni ein gwneud yn cael ei wneud am y tro gyntaf. Roedd nodi marwolaeth y Frenhines Elizabeth yr Ail yn un o'r rain. Roedd yr achlysur lle y clywon ystod eang o atgofion. Personal reflections, Llywydd, as you said, often focusing on the Queen's many visits to the Senedd, her encounters and her conversations with members here. Historical reflections, focusing on the many changes which have taken place in Wales over the last 70 years. And constitutional reflections too, emphasising the commitment showed by the Queen to this democratic institution and its place in a devolved United Kingdom. Many of the contributions were sombre. They reflected a sense of grief, of loss, and of national significance. But just as many were human stories of a life devoted to service and to duty, but imbued by that keen sense of interest the Queen always showed in the people she met and in all those things which, in our case, make Wales what it is in the 21st century. We know, because we saw it here, in this chamber, less than a year ago. Today, there is a sense of transition in Wales. This morning we came together in a service of reflection at Llandaff Cathedral to look back over a reign unrivalled in its length and its reach. Later today, people in Wales will have their chance to meet the new King at Cardiff Castle for the first time, the start of a new era. Nawr rydym yn croesawu'r brenin i'r Senedd, nid am y tro gyntaf, wrth cwrs, a rydym yn gobeithio y bydd llawer o ymweliadau tebyg yn y dyfodol. Rydym yn edrych ymlaen at y cyfle i croesawu tywysog Cymru yma ar gyfer ei ymweliad cyntaf. Ond heddiw, rydym yn cyflwyno y cynnig o cydymdeimlad gan y Senedd i'r brenin a'r frenhines gydweddog. Rydym yn ei croesawu wrth iddo dderbyn y cynnig o gydymdeimlad a paswyd gennym ddydd Sul. Bod y Senedd hon yn mynegu ei thristwch mawr am y farwolaeth a'i mawr hydi y frenhines, ac yn cynnig ei chydymdeimlad di-ffiant yw'r mawr hydi y brenin ac aelodau eraill o'r teulu brenhinol.
Llywydd, Prif Weinidog, aelodau o'r Senedd, diolch o galon i chi am eich geriau caredig. I am deeply grateful for the addresses of condolence which so movingly paid tribute to our late sovereign, my beloved mother, the Queen. Gwn y bydd Senedd o phobl Cymru yn rhannu fy nristwch. Through all the years of her reign, the land of Wales could not have been closer to my mother's heart. Roedd lle arbennig I Gymru yn ei chalon. I know she took immense pride in your many great achievements, even as she also felt with you deeply in time of sorrow. It must surely be counted the greatest privilege to belong to a land that could inspire such devotion. I am resolved to honour that selfless example in the spirit of the words by which I have always tried to live my own life. Ich dien, I serve. Gwasanaethaf. Braint oedd bod yn dywysog Cymru mor hir. Yn awr bydd fy mab William yn derbyn y teitl. Mae ganddo ef gariad dyfn at Gymru. I take up my new duties with immense gratitude for the privilege of having been able to serve as Prince of Wales. That ancient title, dating from the time of those great Welsh rulers like Llywelyn ap Griffith, whose memory is still rightly honoured, I now pass to my son William, whose love for this corner of the earth is made all the greater by the years he himself has spent here. Boneddigion a boneddigesau, fel fy mam anwyl o'n blaen, rhywun gwybod ein bod ni oll yn carrier wlad arbennig hon. Having visited the Senedd regularly since it was founded, and having heard your heartfelt words today, I know we all share the deepest commitment to the welfare of the people of this land, and that we will all continue to work together to that end.
Thank you, Your Majesty, for your words to the Senedd and to Wales. You and your family will be in our hearts over the next few days. The Queen's final words to us in this chamber were also your first words to us in this chamber today. Her words in Welsh, diolch o galon, heartfelt thanks. To the Queen, therefore, our heartfelt thanks for a lifetime service. Diolch o galon i'r Frenhines Elizabeth yr Ail am oes o wasanaeth a gyflawnwyd gydag urddas a pharch. Boed iddi heddwch y nawr yn ei gorffwys. That brings our proceedings to a close for today.
The Wales Herald there leading the procession from the chamber, the motion of condolence having been made and responded to by His Majesty the King in Welsh as well as in English. And we heard from the King. He said that Wales could not have been closer to the heart of the Queen. Roedd Cymru yn ei chalon, he said. And now, alongside the Llywydd, His Majesty the King is meeting 12 representatives of Wales's Youth Parliament, Senedd Ieuenctid Cymru. They're made up of 60 elected representatives of young people aged from 11 to 18 from right across Wales. And some lovely smiles there. They debate and discuss issues of importance to young people, and it's an opportunity for them to work with those in power to reflect the views of their generation, their needs, as well as their achievements. Interestingly, they now meet in Tŷ Hywel, which is the building behind the Senedd, where in fact Assembly members would meet and conduct sessions before this Senedd building was officially opened in 2006. His Majesty the King, of course, has a long association with youth organisations, and now taking the opportunity to really have a good chat with these members of the Welsh Youth Parliament.
Yes, it was an early start today, 3:30, but worth it.
Among the group today, we know Iestyn Jones is being presented from Carmarthen East and Dynevor. I'm sure this is going to be an occasion that really will stay with these young people as they journey through their lives. Also today, Leola Roberts-Biggs from Allen and Deeside is being presented. The King really taking time to chat to these members of the Welsh Youth Parliament. And the Queen Consort, Camilla. This taking place just after that reading of the motion of condolence. A ceremonial role, and this now really just a chance to chat, as we've seen the King doing already this morning in Llandaff as he met the crowds. King seeming to enjoy. And again, big smiles that we can see. First Minister Mark Drakeford there also having a chat with these members of the Welsh Youth Parliament. And there's Seth Burke, partner elected member. One of the 12 young people being presented today. Other members of the Welsh Youth Parliament also here today. They've been able to follow proceedings. The other members up in the public gallery, where they've been able to watch and feel part of this significant occasion. It was in 2014 that the Senedd signed up for the Youth Engagement Charter, where young people's opinions are listened to, acted on and respected. And now the royal party with the Senedd Llywydd moving through the building.
So the motion of condolence made, a ceremony full of tradition and history, despite this very modern setting. Professor Laura McAllister from Cardiff University still alongside me. Laura, your thoughts?
Fittingly, I think there was a very nice blend of the old and the new, with the pageantry and heraldry of the entrance, but then some more informal anecdotes communicated by the Llywydd, the speaker of the Senedd. And then I think some nice representation of the next generation as well. We saw the new king meet with some members of the Senedd Ieuenctid, the youth parliament, which of course are the future generation of, let's hope, future politicians in Wales. And I'm sure they communicated their wishes for the future of Wales to the new king. So I think overall it was a powerful representation of Wales as a distinctive nation with an identity of its own, particularly in the use of both of our official languages, of course, and the king himself, who learnt Welsh whilst he was studying at Aberystwyth, used some of that Welsh in the chamber, in the debating chamber. And I think that reflects in many ways what we're about as a modern nation in Wales.
Indeed, there is one word that we use in the Welsh language, pwysigrwydd. It means the importance, very important and very powerful, hearing the new king using the Welsh language.
I think so, yes. I mean, particularly for viewers who are not from Wales, it might surprise them that the two languages, our two historic languages, have the same status here in Wales by law. And of course, this institution, the Senedd, operates entirely bilingually with the same status for Welsh as for English. And I think hearing the king use Welsh in the chamber, in the chambers, is hugely significant because it's such an important part of our national life.
He is very interested in the Welsh language, having spoken to him when he formally opened the BBC tours at the new Central Square buildings at BBC Cymru Wales. He asked me about my learning of Welsh, and you get the feeling he is fascinated by the language.
I think so, and it'll be interesting too to see how the new Prince of Wales, Prince William, takes that forward, of course, somebody who has very close associations with Wales throughout his life. But his father certainly embraced the Welsh language. Some would say it's not an easy language to learn, but I think in fairness to the king, he spoke clearly and well in Welsh, and that reflects well, I think, on his engagement with everything that makes Wales a distinctive nation.
And here we can see His Majesty now chatting to Aelodau Seneddol, Welsh language term for the members of the Senedd. And we know, hearing Professor Sir Dayan Hopkin in studio today, the King is interested in political life, Laura.
I think so. I mean, of course, the monarch remains politically neutral, but that's different to saying that, just like his mother, there's a real engagement with the different politics of each of the nations of the United Kingdom. And in many respects, it's that continuity that has a real contribution to protecting the union. Perhaps the monarchs are more nuanced and more respectful of that than some politicians, dare I say, because there is a different politics now, of course, in Scotland and in Wales and in Northern Ireland and in England. And I think the King will be mindful of that and will be respectful of that in terms of how he operates.
You're absolutely right, Laura, because it's a very different political time, isn't it, across the United Kingdom. And there we can see the Queen Consort Camilla talking to Vaughan Gething, who of course was pivotal during the the COVID pandemic here in Wales.
Economics Minister here in Wales, and we've seen quite a few members of the Welsh Cabinet there who, as you say, during COVID were elevated in terms of their profile because they were making decisions on day-to-day matters that affected the people of Wales. So much more well known now, let's say, in Welsh public circles.
And a very different political situation we have here in Wales, and it's worth describing this to our viewers across the UK and around the world, of how Wales is now politically compared to when Her Majesty the Queen opened the Senedd building in 2006.
I think there's no real comparison. If we go back a little bit further to 1999, when this institution was established as a National Assembly then, it had very few powers. It merely had powers over secondary legislation. Now it's a fully fledged parliament with primary lawmaking powers. It controls aspects of taxation and scrutinises the Welsh Government. So the status of the Senedd is really entrenched in Welsh public life now, and I'm sure the King will be respectful and mindful of that because this institution is very much part of the fabric of the new Wales.
One thing I'd like to mention as well, Laura, we are very much in the heart of Bute Town, Wales's most multicultural part of our country, our gorgeous country, and how wonderful that at Llandaff Cathedral today it was a multi-faith service, and that is also a sign of how Wales is changing, both politically and culturally.
I think so, yes. I mean, as you say, where we are now is right in the heart of multicultural Wales, and I think one of the really important aspects of this fantastic building has been its inclusivity. It was designed as such by Lord Richard Rogers, of course, and it was meant to bring the communities and the people of Wales together. We have a circular debating chamber, the only one of its kind in the United Kingdom, which was meant to create a less confrontational environment. And I think that notion of equality and inclusivity runs through the fabric of everything that we're trying to instill in our Welsh democracy.
As you can see, the King there talking to Plaid Cymru's Trin Aberwarth and taking time as well, Laura.
I think so, and I think that's very, very important, you know, to show that the King understands the pivotal role that these politicians play in affecting the lives of the people of Wales. The Senedd and the Welsh Government has authority over education, over health, over transport, over economic development, over culture and agriculture. So everything that touches the lives of the Welsh people is decided upon and scrutinised here in the Senedd. And I think that's a significant change, you know, a move away from the centralised Westminster system to a much more decentralised, devolved system. And that's entrenching itself now in the minds of the Welsh people as well.
And a quick word, if I may, just go back to the motion of condolence and the fact that the King talked about Her Majesty and how she held Wales very close to her heart.
I think most people recognise that. The Queen attended every single one of the official openings of the Senedd or the National Assembly. As we mentioned earlier, she came to the opening of this magnificent building as well. So I think there was no doubt at all in Her Majesty the Queen's mind that Wales was a distinctive part of the United Kingdom, but a very fundamental one too. And I think particularly her allegiance to Welsh culture, her understanding of the distinctiveness of our languages really played a part in that.
And we've talked about political life, but also Wales has very much changed, hasn't it, as a country in general terms, Laura, from when the Prince of Wales was made Prince of Wales.
Oh, very much so. I mean, if we look back to the 1960s, there were very few artefacts, if you like, of a Welsh state, whereas most of those are now very present and very visible. There is a civic society and a civil society with organisations that train their interests on and about Wales. And I think, you know, we might have a fairly young democracy here in Wales, but it's one that's growing at pace, and it's one that's gaining more confidence and belief in itself as a distinctive part of the fabric of the United Kingdom.
But also what is key, and we've heard this throughout the morning and the afternoon, is the King knows Wales. He's got his house in Wales, and he knows the institutions and the way Welsh people think. And of course, he is completely au fait with the workings of the Senedd.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, the Prince of Wales, as was, served for a long time in that role, of course, and had very close allegiances with a whole range of Welsh institutions. And some of that, of course, has already been put in train for the new Prince of Wales, Prince William. Prince William is a patron of many organisations in Wales, including the Welsh Rugby Union. And I think that apprenticeship is very important for his engagement now with the next phase of this work. I think it's fair to say too, Jason, that the announcement of Prince William as Prince of Wales wasn't met with complete acceptance by the people of Wales. Some people feel that that was inappropriate in terms of timing, but nevertheless, I think we'll wait to see now whether Prince William follows in the same footsteps as his father did in that role.
Yes, as you say, constitutionally, it was never a given. But how inevitable do you think it was in reality, Laura?
Well, the Prince of Wales title itself has no official constitutional status, but I think it was fairly clear that this would be bestowed on Prince William. I think the timing might have surprised a few people, as it was done very quickly, of course. But I think if you look at Prince William's own engagement with Wales, that gives you a fairly strong steer that this was going to happen. He was based in Ynys Môn while serving in the RAF with his wife and his small child, and has been very involved with a whole range of Welsh institutions. Not as long an apprenticeship, of course, as his father had in that role, but let's see now what happens next.
Well, in fact, during that motion of condolence, the King mentioned that the now Prince of Wales has a deep affection also for Wales, given the time he spent on Ynys Môn working at Bali.
Yes, I think that's right, and that's evident, isn't it? Prince William came to Wales during the Jubilee celebrations and has always actively engaged with Welsh organisations. So I think there was a degree of inevitability about that title being bestowed on Prince William.
The First Minister, Mark Drakeford, said on BBC Radio last week, now is not the time for public debate. Those debates will happen, won't they, Laura, in the forthcoming
I think
days?
they will, and I accept that we're in a period of mourning, and we must be respectful, and I think that's what the people of Wales would want. But I think the debate about the monarchy and indeed about the title Prince of Wales will happen, and I think it's right that it happens, because we are a mature democracy now. We want people's voices to be heard, and there will be different opinions on this, of course, and they should be heard, but I think that happens after this period of respectful mourning for the Queen.
And just how important would you say this visit has been at the heart of Welsh democracy today?
I think it's been significant. I think just displaying some of the distinctive characteristics of our nation, which of course is an ancient nation but with a new democracy, showing that we have two official languages, hearing some of the culture and music of Wales and the status of this institution, I think is important, not just within Wales but for the rest of the United Kingdom, because sometimes we can be seen as the invisible part of the United Kingdom, and today has been about showing why and how Wales is different.
And also, whilst you're looking at these magnificent pictures inside the Senedd, I can tell you on this beautiful day here in the heart of Cardiff Bay that the crowds are still here, watching on big screens, seeing the King, and also there was a huge round of applause for him once he delivered that speech in the Senedd, Laura.
Yes, there was. That was impromptu, wasn't it? People were watching on the screen and saw the close of that and broke into applause. And I think there is a natural affection for the King, because the people of Wales know him from his role as Prince of Wales. I think it will be interesting over time to see whether that cements as solidly as it did for Queen Elizabeth. But I think that the crowd today have come to see a historic occasion, which is the new King's first visit to our nation.
And it's really key, isn't it, that many children were brought across from Penarth and a few other of the schools inside the city centre to witness this historic moment.
Yes, I think so, yes. I think the children will want to see the new King and the Queen Consort and understand that this moment is a symbol of a new dawn in terms of the monarchy's relationship with Wales.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, people are not leaving either, Laura.
No, I think they're waiting to see the King leave the Senedd building. I think at the moment the King is talking to some other Assembly Senedd members.
I think it's Julie Morgan, isn't it?
I can see MS. Julie Morgan there, yes, who's a Deputy Minister, and Dawn Bowden, who's the Sport and Culture Minister. He's spending quite a lot of time with them, clearly, to hear their views and to, I'm sure, accept their condolences on the loss of his mother. But it is important, yes, because of course we have 4 parties represented here. I'm not sure people in the rest of the UK will know that, but there are 4 parties here, and we have a cooperation agreement between 2 of them, Plaid Cymru and Labour. So we have a different kind of politics operating. So I'm sure the King would want to meet as many of those MSs as he possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget that the King is very familiar with this building because he attended all the official openings with Her Majesty.
Yes, that's right. And if you think back to 23 years ago, the first opening of the first National Assembly as was, we saw Her Majesty the Queen with Prince Philip and Prince Charles attend, and looking at documents that have since emerged, that was against some of the advice that they were given because the model of devolution that we had back in 1999 wasn't as strong or as muscular as the model in Scotland. But I think the fact that Her Majesty chose to attend was a very important decision on her part as well, because it showed the legitimacy of every part of the United Kingdom, and particularly the legitimacy of a very fledgling institution, which of course has changed out of all recognition in the past 20 years.
And would you say that has grown, say, in the past 5 years, Laura?
Oh, very much so. I mean, we know it's only been called Senedd, which is the Welsh word for Parliament, in the past 2 years. And that, for me, reflects a really significant change in authority and powers. This institution now makes its own laws, it collects its own taxes, it scrutinises the finance and spend and policy of Welsh Government, and therefore it touches the lives of every single Welsh citizen. And that's very, very important, and I think a significant move from the very immature democracy we had back in 1999.
It looks like the royal party will be heading off very shortly. Queen Consort Camilla talking to a few more members of the Senedd before departing. It really feels a very, very respectful moment.
I think so. I think it's an important moment because it's so soon after the death of Her Majesty the Queen, a very sombre environment, but also people wanting to see a new era with King Charles III taking the throne.
Yeah. This is 11-year-old Osian, who attends a local primary school, who's been waiting by the door ever so patiently. Well done, Osian, da iawn, to present the Queen Consort with a posy as the royal party leave the Neuadd, bringing the formal elements of today's visit to a close. Magnificent building here at Senedd Cymru, Welsh Parliament, and now an opportunity for the King to meet some of those local school children.
Yes, I think so, and I'm sure he'd be very keen to pay tribute to the young people, particularly who've stood here, Jason, as we know, for quite a few hours, really.
They did indeed.
And they've been waiting very patiently to see the first glimpse of the King and the Queen Consort. I think they'll want to have an opportunity to pass on their condolences, but also to wish him all the best in his new role.
Laura, thank you very much indeed. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Jason and Laura, thank you very much indeed. And a pretty in-depth analysis there of some of the changes that we've seen in the political structures in Wales, reflected in this royal visit. And a very different type of element of the visit that we saw earlier up at the cathedral. But some things don't change because he is now going out to meet some school children. Outside the Senedd, I have to say, I think covered developments at the Senedd for many years. It's a huge crowd there, and Dayan, it's something that, and Kim, who are both with me still, something that you were struck by.
I think this is a historic moment in a very real sense, because look at the size of that crowd. I don't think I've seen a crowd of that size, and I think it's a reflection of this moment where it's so public. You know, you're now seeing something which was never seen before. I also think it's historic in another sense. I thought the speech was not only fascinating because of its use of the Welsh language, alternating, but also the fact that there was a continuum offered. When he talked about the Prince of Wales, for example, he didn't say, well, Edward I's Prince of Wales. He went back earlier. He talked about Griffith ap Cynan and the Princes of Wales before the conquest.
Yes, so the significance of this, for those who are not au fait with Welsh history, we're going back to the native Welsh princes, defeated by the English, of course, and since then the Prince of Wales has been in the gift of the English monarch to give.
Yeah. Well, strictly speaking, I mean, Prince William would be the 23rd, starting with Edward I's son, who held our son outside Carnarvon Castle. Now, you know, there are many people who say, well, that wasn't the first Prince of Wales. There were lots of earlier ones. And that, I think, is the interesting point. This is almost the first time I've heard somebody say, well, there is a continuum going back pre-conquest. And that will raise some interesting debates.
Interesting bit of history there. Kim, to bring you in, look, there we see the King again meeting the public. I mean, we talk about the changing political structures in Wales. Some things don't change from the days when you were an MP. Labour is still the dominant force in Welsh politics, just an indication that another use of the word continuum. To what extent do you think that the Welsh public's, the public in Wales, their relationship with the royal family has changed over the years?
I don't think it's changed a great deal at all. I'm old enough to remember I was sitting on my father's shoulders in Trecynan when the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh on the coronation tour went past, and people were applauding and waving in great numbers. I think we've got to differentiate between the way most people in Wales feel about this whole business of the relationship with the royal family and the way in which the political class feels about it, and those professors of history and those who comment on this sort of relationship feel they're fascinated by this. Is this a continuum or isn't it one? The way most people feel is there's a dubiety maybe in some quarters, but there's also a great affection.
Okay, let's just pause and reflect and just see. You can almost hear a bit of interaction going on there. The familiar scene with the mobile phones. No gifts this time. He was handed a whole variety of gifts in Llandaff. And there you go. You get a sense of the crowd there. We're in Cardiff Bay. We're right on the southern tip of the city. The new political institution that's been there for just over 20 years. And as has been mentioned already, the Queen, and more often than not accompanied by, as he then was, the Prince of Wales, for the official opening of each term. With both of you, just get a sense of the future of how William now will approach the role of the Prince of Wales, because he talked about it in his address in Welsh, and talked about the love that William has for Wales. Kim, maybe to kick off with you. Now, of course, we've got a Prince and a Princess of Wales, a modern couple on the world stage.
A power couple on the world stage. These are very, very famous people now, and they're very new people in the public eye in so many ways. Don't forget, Prince Charles, as was now His Majesty the King, he's been there for a very, very long time and inherited a great deal of the politics of the late 1960s and the 1970s and all of that controversy. This new couple, they're very, very different, and I in a way I can see that continuum that everybody's been talking about. But also, it's a new page entirely.
Oh, absolutely, Dan.
Well, I think there's an important difference, actually, because when Prince of Wales, or King Charles was Prince of Wales, he was the heir to the throne. And therefore, he had a role as heir to the throne and the rest of it. William and Kate have not been in that position, and therefore they've had more freedom to develop their personas, to actually make their presence felt on a much wider scale. And therefore, they've had quite a normal life, some people would say, when he was working in the service of the rest of it, something that King Charles didn't actually have. And so to that point, they've associated themselves perhaps with the way a lot of people live in the way that members of the royal family don't. And I think that will prepare him better for it.
Okay, so we've got some final goodbyes to the large crowd outside the Welsh Parliament. And again, this glorious sunshine, the royal car leaves the Senedd. So on that point, I'd like to thank you, Sir Dane Hopkins, Kim Howells, both of your contributions this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the next stop for the royal party is Cardiff Castle, originally a Roman fort built and famously extended by one of the wealthiest men in the world at the time, the coal baron, the third Marquess of Bute, who engaged the architect William Burgess to design his ideal castle. At the castle for us this afternoon is my colleague, Jennifer Jones.
Well, Nick, yes, this castle is steeped in 2,000 years of history, and it was right here 6 days ago when the Wales Herald proclaimed Charles the new king. And today, this castle in the heart of the Welsh capital will honour and welcome the new monarch. Now, there will be echoes of Queen Elizabeth II's first visit to Cardiff Castle shortly after her coronation in 1953, and today feels like just such an historic day. Now, it all started relatively noisy here at Cardiff Castle this morning with a royal gun salute that was fired by reservists from 104 Regiment Royal Artillery. Following that, they opened the castle gates and visitors and well-wishers flooded in, all eager to welcome the royal party. Now, we spoke to those at the front of the queue. They arrived at 4:45 this morning. They said it was slightly colder than they were expecting, but they stuck it out because they wanted to be the first in through those gates and into the castle grounds. And I don't know if you can see behind me the regimental band of the Royal Welsh. Now, they've been entertaining the crowds for the past hour, and when the royal party arrive, there will be a guard of honour made up of young cadets representing all three armed forces from all across Wales. So following that very moving service at Llandaff Cathedral and those more formal events at the Senedd, it's expecting that the proceedings here will be a little bit more relaxed and more personal. So the King will hold a private audience with the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, and the Llywydd, the presiding officer, Elin Jones, and that will be followed by a reception where the King and the Queen Consort will meet representatives from local charities, from the Prince of Wales's charities and the Queen's patronages. They will also meet faith leaders of all faiths from all across Wales. So there's a slightly more informal, relaxed feel here at the castle. We know that the royal party will be making its way up St Mary's Street. There are thousands of well-wishers lining the streets. We can't see them yet, obviously, Nick, but we will keep an eye out and we will let you know as soon as they get here.
Thank you, Jen. So a sense there of the final chapter of the visit in Wales of the new king. Some great sights out of the city centre of Cardiff. Some of the grand old streets, St Mary Street, which is what they'll go through leading up to the castle. And inside the castle, of course, it's a magical place. It could be the setting for a film or a drama. And someone who would know only too well is my next guest, the actor Owen Teale. Good afternoon. Great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So look, just tell us, you have a relationship with the King. You've known him a number of years. How did it come about? And
it still sounds very, very strange when you say I have a relationship with the King.
A friendship?
Yes. No, I just mean, you know, that it's still a bit of a surprise to me, and I'd just like to thank you, the BBC, and everyone for giving me this chance to say diolch o galon to their Majesties for the kindnesses they've shown me and the time that I've spent with them in their roles as, as the Prince of Wales. And we met some time ago at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I was a member of the company, and Prince Charles, as was president. Still is, I think, I'm not sure how that changes, of the company. And the play was Henry IV, Part 1, which takes on the story of the Prince of Wales and how his wayward life is changed by becoming king. And so there was some sense of, I don't know, prophecy or but I'm not really sure. But he definitely said to me on occasion, how did he know? How did Shakespeare know how this would feel? You know, that there was insight that he wasn't really prepared for, and how he loved that. And from that, we, over the years, have spent some wonderful times discussing poetry, performance, and he's asked me to be part of that, and very much with the story of, it was the 100th anniversary of the birth of Dylan Thomas, and I was doing Under Milkwood on a nationwide tour, and I was invited to join him because he'd chosen Fern Hill, a wonderful poem of Dylan Thomas, to commemorate this wonderful occasion. And but the point was, he was going to be the one recording it, not me. So I've done many times where I go along to venues and sing for my supper. And on this occasion, I had to come to Clarence's house and come in through the back, through the warm offices, and then into the cold houses. Famously, you know, he doesn't like the central heating and the windows open. And I was deeply grateful because I tend to get a bit overheated. And with that, I'm in a sitting room, you know, his sitting room. And I'm fully loaded with a cup of tea and a cucumber sandwich, and I'm very, very happy. And he's put me at my ease. He's so kind as we're watching, you know, him greeting people, his empathy. And at that moment, I realized, no, I'm not going to have to perform. You are. What if this is terrible? This could go so wrong. But
he was going to perform for you?
Yes. He said, well, I better do it. And then he said, I could do it in a Welsh accent. I said, no, sir, please, please don't do that. And then I noticed that he was twinkling. It was that wonderful humor that you've heard people talk about. And it was putting me at my ease. And he was the one who had to do it. And he was wonderful. He did it, and I said, that gives me such joy, because it's a poem that's overwrought and often done to the hilt. And there he was in his own way. And, you know, it was broadcast on Radio 4. And
well, I respect his bravery. That must have been quite intimidating from his side of things, to perform in front of you,
a Welsh
professional
actor,
actor, of course. And we can now see the King's car going through the centre of Cardiff. No doubt a part of the world you will know well, Owen.
Yes. Yes, for different reasons, really, yes. More the pubs, I would imagine.
Yeah, for those who don't know the geography here, I mean, a lot of people would have gone to Cardiff to visit the Principality Stadium, or the Millennium Stadium as it was. This is the main street that just runs parallel to that. Very compact city, the castle, the rugby stadium, all within a matter of yards of each other. Sorry to bring in the cliches of the Welsh there.
No.
But great scenes here, Owen, isn't it?
Oh, it is. Look at these people, you know? That's what he can do, and they do, is bring focus to people. And with that, as I say, there's this great sense of empathy that he has with the people.
We'll hear from you in a minute. As he enters the Cardiff, the castle, let's go back to Jennifer Jones.
Well, yes, Nick, the royal party is just arriving. Let's have a quick word with Colin Jackson, Olympian world champion. You're a son of Cardiff. It's a historic day for your home city.
It's a massive day for us, as you can imagine, yes, especially with the national anthem just beginning.
Cheers there for the arrival of the new king at Cardiff Castle. Colin, there's a large crowd here. They're obviously very excited to see him.
It is very impressive, the amount of people have turned out and been waiting for some time. There's been a really good, positive vibe
As you look around, there's so many people from all walks of life here and really enjoying and celebrating this occasion.
Well, the King and the Queen Consort have been received by the Vice Lord Lieutenant of South Glamorgan, Sir Brooke Boothby, and they are being introduced to representatives and civil leaders from Cardiff City Council, the Councillor Hugh Thomas, the leader of Cardiff City Council, the Chief Executive of the City Council, Paul Orders, and the manager of Cardiff Castle, Chris Hadfield. Now the Lord Lieutenant is expected to escort the royal couple into the castle apartments. Well, Colin, lots of cheering, lots of clapping. People are clearly very excited to welcome the new monarch. Is this what you expected from Cardiff?
You know, this is exactly what I was hoping from Cardiff, to be honest. You know, we are the capital city. The eyes of the world are on us at this particular moment. And of course, the royal family has residence across this planet. So you can see that it's a really important opportunity for the city of Cardiff to celebrate the fact that our new monarch has arrived.
Now, there are dozens of people waiting inside the castle apartments, eagerly awaiting to meet King Charles and the Queen Consort. You have met them several times. You're a CBE, OBE, MBE. It's an impressive list. Well, what's it like to meet senior members of the royal family?
Do you know, it was always a pleasure. They always had a smile on their faces. Their energy was, and the enthusiasm really was always a very positive for me. And, you know, I myself received my OBE here from King Charles himself when he was Prince of Wales, and that was such an exciting moment because he spent so much time with us after the award, just to chat. So he was very much a normal, everyday person.
And you met the Queen for the first time when you were just 22.
I was really young, and I'd literally just finished representing Wales at the Commonwealth Games, and I was awarded the MB. So to meet the Queen for the very first time, you can imagine, I was very nervous as a young man.
But you were telling me earlier, Colin, that she always put you at ease and made you laugh a lot.
Oh, on numerous occasions. I remember one time we were at a private luncheon that she had, and I was leaving Buckingham Palace and heading down to Brixton, and she asked me just before I left where I was actually going, and I said to her, well, I'm heading to Brixton now, Mum, and she said, it's going to be a bit of a culture shock now, isn't it? Leaving Buckingham Palace and going there, and I was like, you're right, yeah, always made me smile.
One extreme to the other. And then your relationship then with the new king. I mean, how many times have you met him?
Oh, goodness gracious. You know, I think on numerous occasions again, because he's a huge sports fan. We've got to remember that. You know, his father, as we know, was really passionate about sports. So what was exciting that he's really taken that mantle on his own way.
OK, Colin, thank you. Don't go anywhere. Hopefully we'll come back to you later on. That's all from the castle for now. Back to you, Nick.
Thank you, Jen. Well, Owen, we heard that from Colin Jackson that the king loves sport, but you know, his friendship with you, he loves the arts as well, doesn't he?
Very much, yes. In my experience, he understands and has a great passion for theatre and what it does in its role in society, that it's where we go to find ourselves, to see ourselves, whether it's by entertainment, by comedy, or really at the heart of it is where we see each other, and he's devoted.
How do you think he will be as king?
I think he will continue, as we see now, in his great belief in what the monarch can do. And that'll be a wonderful thing, as I say, to be present, to bring focus to things that are deserving, and whilst doing that, to have great empathy with the people he meets.
Do you see him as a moderniser or a continuer of the
Well, I think a bit
traditions?
of. I think there'll be both. I think he realises his place. He's had a long time to prepare for that transition, which is now fully underway, and I think he's hit the ground running. And I think he has started as he means to go on. I think the thing today, the amount of Welsh he spoke at the Senedd, was wonderful, and his understanding of what a modern Wales is.
Well, Owen Teale, he obviously took on the tips from you when he performed that poem in front of you and took it on board with,
Yes.
I'm sure, very good advice in terms of all the speeches and addresses he shall do in future as king, of course. Owen Teale, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Diolch yn fawr.
Well, that is the end of a momentous week across the nations. King Charles and his Queen Consort now spend the next few hours in Wales within the privacy of the castle apartments. Today, the people of Wales have had the chance to witness a prince becoming a king. Goodbye, hwyl fawr.